A boy lies exhausted on the ground, wondering what's happening. As he looks at his body, he realizes it's pierced with thorns and remembers he's in a dungeon. From above, people gaze down, marveling at the effect of the 7th trap and how crazy it is that this happened so soon. A man with a bow in hand says they can't waste time because they're being pursued, and a long-haired man apologizes for abandoning him. Bleeding on the thorns, the boy wonders if this is how he will die. He pulls out one of the thorns and tries to stand while in agony. Looking at his hand, he notices his vision blurring and that he's lost too much blood. He says the situation doesn't seem real, but from the start, nothing seemed normal in this world of horror. This reality began a month ago when he was summoned to a world called Dungeon. He was walking down the street when suddenly he felt something strange. A blue light appeared under his feet, and as he watched his hand disintegrate, he wondered what was happening, and then he vanished. Transported to a secluded forest, he arrived to see several people in front of him. Everyone seemed confused about what was happening. As he wondered what this place was and why there were so many people, he realized they had all been teleported out of nowhere and their phones no longer worked. He turned when he heard someone say, "Welcome to the dungeon." A cute rabbit appeared saying it was a pleasure to meet them and that it would be their guide in this game. It said it knew they must be wondering what kind of game it was. The protagonist and the others seemed confused by a talking rabbit. A man in a suit walked toward the rabbit, demanding to know what was going on. Angrily, he said he didn't care about this game nonsense because he was late for work and told the rabbit to stop hiding in that costume while spouting nonsense. The rabbit insisted it wasn't nonsense because the information was very important and they were the only ones there. It asked everyone to listen carefully as it would explain the rules. Suddenly, the man in the suit grabbed it by the collar and told it to shut up. The rabbit said a game tutorial would come first. Learn as you die, it declared, waving its arms, announcing this was the dungeon game, while the protagonist told the man to wait. The rabbit then said it would discuss the important rules to satisfy the hot-headed man. The protagonist thought it was a dream until the rabbit commanded everyone to respect the game guide. With a deadly swipe, it decapitated the man, stating they should value their lives. That's when the protagonist realized it wasn't a dream. Excitedly, the rabbit asked if everyone understood that ignoring the rules meant death. The people panicked, disbelieving. With a sinister look, the rabbit said there were 100 of them and asked if it could start the real game called Learn as you die. At that moment, the protagonist understood it wasn't a dream. It was the reality of the dungeon game. The protagonist's legs began to tremble, and he fell to the ground as everyone fled in disbelief. The rabbit said the surroundings were dangerous and that, as the guide, it would provide basic equipment. With an abracadabra, a blade with a purple aura appeared before the protagonist and various other weapons materialized in each participant's hand. As the rabbit hopped excitedly, people began to believe it was virtual reality. The rabbit said they could interpret it however they wanted but asked if they could start now. It said they should begin by surviving as long as possible. The dungeon game starts now, and so the dungeon game began with monsters attacking from all sides. Deadly traps claimed lives. Bodies piled up on the ground. As time passed, more people lost their lives due to a moment's distraction or mistake, and they had to start killing each other to survive. Someone kicked the protagonist in the back. He said that was all he had to eat, but the man said he was a useless member of the production class. Those belonging to the combat class were protecting trash like him, so if he commanded to give something, there should be no backtalk. The players had another type of weapon called abilities. They granted special powers like in a game, and most people received combat abilities. However, the protagonist was different. In his status window, the only available ability was to purify impurities, an apparently useless ability since it didn't aid in combat, and the most he could do was detoxify the meat of animals or monsters. The man said the protagonist should be grateful, and that he would already be dead if he hadn't been parasitizing their group, eating without even helping in fights. But then, a man with long hair appeared, asking what he was doing. This was Seoenji Woo, who said the food would be distributed tomorrow. The man, with a nervous smile, said the fights had been extreme that day, so he thought to recover some life, but Seoen said there were no exceptions. With a threatening look, he told him to wait until tomorrow. The man left frustrated. Seoen helped the protagonist stand and asked if he was okay. He then called the protagonist by his name, Diayuen, and told him not to mind what was said, because everyone was on edge these days. Diayuen said he didn't care, while Seoen walked away, telling him to rest because the guide said they would reach the end point tomorrow. The protagonist thought to himself that he also wanted to help. He summoned his blade and began to train. In the morning, a scream was heard. The group was running from a giant boulder. The bunny guy flying above said they would have trouble if they only looked ahead. It warned of many traps around. Seoen was running with his group, and when he heard this, a trap exploded where they had been passing. Some members are hit, but he yells for them to keep running, dodging the traps, and not to fall behind because if they stop, they will perish. Diayuen is panting and thinks he's reached his limit. He tries to keep up with the group, but his vision starts to blur. At that moment, he steps on a trap, and the ground begins to sink. With a look of shock, he lets out a cry as he falls into the hole that opened in the ground. Seoen, concerned, shouts for the protagonist, The little rabbit says the effect of the 7th trap is incredible, and that there was a surprise waiting below, while a man with an axe says this is madness. The rabbit then says that this trap had a 0% chance of survival. A boy with a bow shouts to Seoung that they can't waste time as they see the boulder rolling towards them. Seoung apologizes to the protagonist and yells to be careful with the ground as the group starts running again. The little rabbit follows them and says he thought Seoung was close to the protagonist but confirmed that he has a cold heart. Seoung mentally apologizes again to him. From the bottom of the hole, Daeun can hear a voice saying that it's been a while since the survivors got there. The protagonist realizes he can hear the rabbit guide's voice since he's still alive. As Daeun summons his blade, the guide asks if he hadn't mentioned there would be a boss, and then introduces the final boss of the phase. Fallen and bleeding among the thorns, Daeun believes his journey ends here. Outside, the group faces the boss, a giant stone golem, which falls after a blow from Seoung, and it shatters into pieces while the rest of the group celebrates defeating the last boss. Then the rabbit appears, congratulating the group. He says it was impressive that, tattered as they were, they managed to defeat the boss, especially Seoung, who remained strong even without one arm. Sweaty and panting, Seoung asks if they can go home now. The rabbit asks why they would return, and with a malevolent smile, they say to enjoy the weather and move on to the next phase. Seoung asks what he's talking about, and shouts that he had said they would clear the dungeon after the boss, but the guide says they only passed the first phase and calls for the next dungeon. The other nervous people wonder if this was really just the first phase. The smiling rabbit asks if they really thought that was the end and apologizes for forgetting to tell them, and then says this is just the beginning of the dungeon game, and that it wouldn't be fun if it ended with just one phase, so he asks why they are reacting like amateurs who have never played before. Seoung looks irritated as the guide repeatedly says they have no time to waste and must learn as they perish in the dungeon game. The guide asks why they look like that. Seeing everyone fallen and indisposed, he asks if they are really tired, and then says it's time to distribute the rewards for passing the phase. Immediately, all the group members start to feel better. They realize their wounds are being healed. Even Seoung's arm has been fully restored. The guide says he looks better with both arms, and that's the reward for passing the phase, and says to continue to the next phase while the protagonist fallen in the hole also begins to be healed. A system window appears showing the reward for completing phase 1. He then realizes his wounds are being healed, and wonders what the heck happened. When he hears the guide saying they will all go to the next phase, he tries to shout asking to be taken with them because he's still alive, but no one hears his cries. He then wonders what he should do alone there, when a system window appears saying the dungeon is resetting. The ground begins to tremble, his blood on the ground begins to disappear, and the opening of the trap begins to close. Daeun remembers there would be other players, and realizes the reset is to prepare the dungeon for the next ones. After the trap was completely closed, he picks up a stone, and throws it to activate the trap and make it open again. But then he realizes he has no rope and could fall on the spikes again if he tries to climb. He starts to think of a way out, when he hears a voice asking what the meaning of this is. The rabbit appears asking why Daeun hasn't died yet, and says he came to check because the trap was activated on its own and asks how he survived. Daeun then explains it was the complete recovery of the survivors, and this leaves a look of astonishment on the guide. He says the protagonist was supposed to die as soon as he fell into the trap, but Daeun just wants to return to his colleagues. The irritated guide says it's not that simple, and asks Daeun to show his status. In his status window, there's error in place of his name. The guide confirms his suspicion and says the dungeon rules consider the protagonist as dead. In a brief moment of hope, Daeun asks if he's no longer a player, and if he could go home, but the guide says he must die there. Daeun is shocked and asks how he came to that conclusion, but he only says it's obvious he will hide the irreparable errors. He then calls the protagonist Mr. Error and tells him to die of hunger. He asks if Daeun was the production class player who hid behind Seung, and says that with that class he has no skills to get out of there. The guide says it wasn't just that trap that reset. He starts flying to the exit, then says that even if he gets out, he will face hell above, so he tells the protagonist to die alone without bothering the other players. Daeun shouts asking him to wait, but the rabbit keeps flying and goes away. Alone in the hole, he thinks about what he was told and wonders why he should die just for being from the production class. At that moment, he remembers the other guy who called him useless, and that they are all damned. While opening his inventory, he questions whether they really think someone would perish just because they were told to, and says not to underestimate the players of the production class. He takes some meat from the inventory, takes a bite, and declares he will survive no matter what. Seeing some fish bones on the ground, Daeun sighs with relief, knowing it's been almost a month since he last ate in peace. But then he starts to wonder what to do next since climbing is difficult and there are monsters to face above. He stands up and gets an idea while looking at the ground. He decides to dig an escape route to the outside. He calculates that he can dig down a bit to distance himself from the rocky walls and then change direction to start ascending. Dae-yoon questions if this is a reckless plan, but then he tells himself he doesn't have much choice and that any place is safer than that hole. So he begins to dig. Inside the tunnel, he's dirty and panting. However, he finds digging fun and wonders if he's going mad after so many dangerous situations. His hands are forming calluses, but he says it's for his own survival. Some soil sediments fall on his head. He realizes he could get buried if he doesn't manage the soil he's already dug. Then he gets the idea to try putting the soil in the inventory. So he opens the inventory and puts some soil in it. He celebrates the practicality of the inventory when he sees that it works. Now digging will be much faster since he no longer risks being buried alive. He continues his excavation, throwing the soil directly into his inventory. Looking at the inventory, he realizes how much he's dug and says it's 1,000 times better than running around trying to survive. Suddenly, a light starts to shine, and a system window appears saying he's gained a new skill. The protagonist is surprised by this. The system window says it's generating the new skill, and Dae-yoon feels something completely new and incredible, a sensation as if he could shatter anything. The system window shows the skill Expert Digger, saying he can now dig better. The protagonist falls to the ground, a bit shaky and confused, wondering why such a skill exists. The system says he can dig faster according to the level, but Dae-yoon says this skill is embarrassing and wonders when he will receive a combat skill. But he soon realizes he gained this skill because he dug a lot. Then he laments that he won't have any amazing combat skills like Seung's. He looks downcast and thinks about how he was a burden to Seon, who even lost an arm to save him. Dae-yoon then hopes that Seung is alright despite not being the type to die easily. He lifts his gaze and decides it's time to test the efficiency of his new skill. He activates his digging skill and forms a ball of soil in his hand, looking somewhat confused. Meanwhile, in the trap hole, the rabbit guide appears again. He's annoyed because he told the protagonist to die quietly, and then he wonders what Dae-yoon is doing down there. The little rabbit starts entering the tunnel, thinking the protagonist is just wasting energy and wonders how far he got before dying. But the tunnel keeps extending, and he realizes that Dae-yoon dug quite a bit. He's impressed with the protagonist's determination and willpower and realizes that Seung wasn't the only reason he survived for so long. Continuing forward, he says it's not like Dae-yoon has become a mole, and that his body must be nearby. But he starts to get startled to see that the tunnel is wider, and he's shocked to see that there aren't even torches. Then he wonders why there are torches in that place, when suddenly he sees the protagonist passing by, whistling while holding a plate of meat. Dae-yoon sees the guide and greets him with a wary hello. The nonplussed guide asks why he's still alive, until he's shocked to see a bed made of stone. Observing the table next to it, he asks how long it has been under the dungeon. A whole room with furniture, torches, and other devices. Seeing this, the irritated rabbit asks what the heck all that is. Dae-yoon takes a ball of soil from his inventory, wets it with a little water, and starts shaping it like clay until he makes a larger plate. The guide asks what he's doing. Dae-yoon places the meat on the plate he just made and says it would be rude to receive a visit empty-handed. While the protagonist cuts the meat, the guide asks if he thinks the dungeon has become his home. And then he remembers that Dae-yoon was responsible for preparing food for his group and comments that he must have plenty of food in stock or must have gained a random new skill. At that moment, the protagonist even stops cutting the meat and the rabbit asks if he really gained a new skill. Dae-yoon, a bit embarrassed since his new skill is digging. The guide bursts into laughter and says that explains how he did all that. After stopping laughing, the rabbit says that Dae-yoon specializes in useless things, and comments that that skill is as strange as another one of purification, but at least he could laugh a bit. Then he jumps off the bench and says that now the protagonist can die. Dae-yoon asks if the guide is going to kill him. The rabbit responds indifferently, saying that the protagonist is going to die anyway, so there's no reason to get his hands dirty with him. And then he comments that they must have finished. Dae-yoon, worried, asks what has been finished. Everything starts to tremble, and the guide says that while the protagonist was playing with soil, the new participants finished Phase 1. Then he says it's a pity since it must have taken a long time to make that hideout. Dae-yoon realizes what's happening. Everything is shaking so much that it knocked down the plate with meat, and he realizes he was so focused on digging that he forgot and wonders why he didn't think of that before. The dungeon is resetting, which means everything he dug will also reset. He starts to run, dashing back to where he came from. The guide congratulates him on his persistence, but says it's too late to escape. As everything collapses, Dae-yoon falls. The rabbit keeps saying the entrance is far away and wonders why he dug so much. It seems there's no way out. Dae-yoon wonders if this is his end, while the guide remarks that he made it quite far, and adds that in the end the protagonist should have stayed put, but instead he dug his own grave. If he had stayed quiet, he wouldn't have to go through all this. However, the rabbit then notices something. The tunnel stops trembling. Dae-yoon is surprised, and the guide is also astonished, asking how this happened. Then, amazed, he wonders if the reset finished and nothing happened to that place. Next, he calls Dae-yoon a cursed bug and says the dungeon's rules seem not to apply to him. The protagonist stands up and asks if the reset is over, but the rabbit rumbles, saying he doesn't know. The guide continues to complain while Daeun looks around. He notices everything is a mess, but it didn't reset. Then he wonders if it's because he's a bug. Daeun then reflects on how he received the dungeon's reward being a bug, and starts to think that he's a player who isn't exactly a player. However, the irritated guide asks what he's thinking about, and tells the protagonist to enjoy the time he has because he will die sooner or later. Daeun seems unfazed, but the rabbit continues trying to scare him, saying this place might collapse on the next reset, or maybe there's a monster under the ground. However, the protagonist remains unshaken, and the guide asks if he's so scared that he doesn't know how to react. Daeun then asks if the guide isn't capable of killing him, and comments that if the rabbit wanted, he could simply cut off his head like he did with the other guy at the start of the game. The little rabbit gets angry and asks where he got that conclusion, then says he just doesn't cut his head off because he doesn't want to get his hands dirty. But Daeun ignores him and walks away carefree, leaving the guide even more irritated, saying he's going to cut his head off. Then the protagonist lets out a smile, realizing that the rabbit really can't kill him directly. As he walks away, the guide is sweating bullets, and concludes that he's in trouble. It was exactly as Daeun guessed, the guide only has permission to kill one player. But since he already used that ability at the start of the game, now he can't cause direct damage to other players. So the guide worries that Daeun might actually get out and his superiors discover that it was his mistake. Meanwhile, the protagonist tries to invite the rabbit back to finish the food but says it's okay if he doesn't want to. Just at that moment, pieces of earth start falling from the tunnel wall. Suddenly, it begins to crack, and then a strong jet of water bursts onto the protagonist. A lot of water is coming in. The rabbit is happy to see that the underground water current broke the wall. Soon starts laughing, saying the water will flood everything and now the protagonist will drown. Daeun thinks the reset made the cave walls fragile. Then the water starts to carry him. An intense current takes over the cave with no sign of Daeun so far. But he manages to emerge from the water and quickly opens his inventory. Then he heads to the hole that opened up and says he's going to stop the leak with earth. He begins to pour the balls of earth from his inventory. Seeing this, the guide can't believe it and asks if he's serious, to which Daeun immediately replies yes. As the protagonist continues to pour earth, the rabbit says he's gone mad and is now trying to stop the leak with pieces of earth. Daeun says that putting one piece at a time might not be enough, but maybe it will work if he puts several. The guide makes a questioning face, and he's startled by the amount of earth. Daeun begins to pour an absurd amount of earth, and the rabbit wonders why on earth he has so much earth in his inventory. The protagonist, with a determined look, thinks he should not be underestimated. He tells himself he's going to stop the leak using all the earth in his inventory. After a while, it seems he's managed to stop it, but it doesn't last long until water starts to spurt out again. Daeun becomes apprehensive and realizes the earth isn't holding up against the water pressure. But he starts to think that maybe a different shape that won't disintegrate under the water pressure would be better. He remembers the system didn't say it had to be a ball, so he starts trying to change to a different shape. Meanwhile, the guide is watching, thinking the protagonist has really gone crazy. The water starts to spurt out stronger, and Daeun starts to plead, almost begging for his ability to change the shape of the earth. The water is almost covering him, but he manages to make a brick-shaped earth. Even underwater, he doesn't falter and celebrates his achievement. Shortly after, the guide is incredulous. The leak has become just a drip. Daeun says he thought he was going to die, and the guide still can't believe he managed to stop the leak. The exhausted protagonist says everything started to go wrong after the rabbit showed up there and asks if he's trying to sabotage him. The guide gets angry again and tells the protagonist to give up and die already. Daeun says he almost died. The rabbit continues to be surprised that the protagonist stopped a big leak, and thinks to himself that not even with a combat ability would it be possible to do that. The guide starts to worry again and thinks the protagonist is too dangerous to stay alive. But suddenly, Daeun calls out, and the rabbit wonders if he's accidentally become friends with him. The protagonist mentions he was worried because his water supply was running low. But thanks to the leak, a well has formed in the cave. The rabbit then says the water might be poisoned, and that Daeun will get diarrhea if he drinks from it. However, the protagonist uses his purification ability, and says that now he can drink, which irritates the rabbit again. Daeun looks at the well thoughtfully. The rabbit asks what he's going to do. With a smile on his face, the protagonist says that now they can put some decorations on the well. Despite the rabbit's denial, Daeun starts building something anyway, and the guide is surprised to see him make a brick ledge in a matter of seconds and realizes how much his skill has improved. Daeun continues to carve something on the wall and says it's the climax of the decoration, making the lion's head fountain despite the rabbit saying it looks like a cat that's been shocked. Daeun places his hand on the mouth of the sculpture and uses his digging ability. Then water starts to gush from the fountain. The little rabbit is annoyed and says the protagonist is doing whatever he wants and asks why he's so unnecessarily detailed. But Daeun questions if he knows how scientific that design is. He points to a pipe that connects to the water source. and says that besides helping to reduce the water pressure so it doesn't explode again, it also prevents the water from spoiling by staying still. And then with a very modest smile, Daun says that such a brilliant job could only be done by a prodigy and wonders if he deserves some achievement for it. Immediately afterward, a glow appears in front of him. The system says he has acquired the achievement of building a well with a lion's head fountain. Daun doesn't understand what that is, and the rabbit can't believe it either. The protagonist is astonished by such an achievement, while the guide can't believe there's an achievement for something so foolish. Next, the system shows that the reward is that fish will inhabit the fountain that Daun built. The protagonist is somewhat confused. The rabbit looks displeased, when suddenly a bright glow appears in the well, and in the blink of an eye, fish appear in the water. The rabbit still refuses to believe this is possible. The protagonist celebrates mega happy because now he doesn't have to worry about dying of hunger or thirst, while the guide continues to wish he would die soon. A tear runs down Daun's cheek, happy to have his efforts rewarded. He celebrates that the gods are helping him, while the rabbit is annoyed and tells him to stop hoping. Sometime later, there's smoke in the middle of the forest, smoke coming out of a hole. Inside, Daun is barbecuing with the spikes from the trap that almost killed him before. The guide laments that the precious dungeon trap is being used to roast meat. The protagonist wonders why he didn't think of that before, and the rabbit calls him an idiot. Daun says he's happy to have had the idea of the barbecue. He then says the guide must be hungry too, since it was he who gave the idea of roasting the meat after cooking. But the rabbit says everyone eats like that because it gives a smoky flavor. The protagonist says the guide can get lost if he's not hungry, but the rabbit retorts that he'll only leave after seeing him dead. Despite this, Daun thanks him and says he was sick of always eating the same thing. Then he offers a piece to the guide again, tells him to take it and thanks him again for the idea. The guide stares at the meat and soon starts to drool, but he refuses, saying he won't eat bad food like that and doesn't care if he eats it all. Daun is a bit surprised, then says he forgot that rabbits are herbivores and apologizes, leaving the guide irritated while he explains that he does eat meat but doesn't want to. The protagonist comments that there's no grass there, making the guide threaten to kill him again. Sometime later, the meat is gone. Only a few bones are left on the ground, while the guide is watching Daun sleep. He comments that the protagonist is very stupid and must be the most relaxed person in the history of the dungeon. Daun starts calling Seoung's name in his sleep, and the guide wonders what kind of dream that is. He flies away and says that Daun is sleeping completely unprotected, while the smoke continues to rise. He says the dungeon monsters are always hungry and wonders if Daun will survive in a cave with no way out. It's already night and the monsters are lurking. The guide with a malicious smile says he hopes Daun had a fantastic last meal. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues to mutter words in his sleep. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a paw stepping on the bones and the giant boar monster appears. Each step shakes everything. He continues to enter the cave until he reaches where Daun is sleeping and ironically saying he wanted pork belly. The boar approaches and starts sniffing the protagonist, who continues in deep sleep and tells him not to touch him. Daun says he's not angry while the monster sniffs his face, and then he punches the boar's snout, shouting that he's not angry and to eat all the meat. He looks to the side, still sleepy, and is startled to see a horned boar. Daun starts to sweat coldly and wonders if he's still dreaming. But his doubt is confirmed as soon as the boar headbutts and completely shatters his bed. The protagonist is sure he will die with just a scratch if the monster hits him. He still tries to talk to the boar and asks if he can understand him like the rabbit, apologizing for hitting him. But the boar doesn't understand, and the protagonist realizes the monster is just hungry. He thinks to himself that he's getting tired of life or death situations and wonders why that creature appeared there. In memory, Siwon explains that boars have absurd strength, but they're not smart, and their patterns are simple, just dodge to the side. Daun imagines that's what Seung would do and wonders if he can do the same. Then he remembers that being just responsible for food, he has no combat skills. However, an idea comes to his mind. He thinks he can be quick with his ability. He starts to manipulate the earth to build a wall in a few seconds. Then he quickly climbs the blocks and jumps as soon as the boar attacks the wall. Some pieces of earth fall from the ceiling thanks to the boar's headbutt, a devastating attack. Daun is worried to see that the monster broke the wall as if it were nothing and reflects that his ability managed to stop that giant water leak. But the boar destroyed the wall in seconds. No wonder they call it the strongest predator of Phase 1. He is sure he will die with any mistake he makes. The monster charges at him again when Daun opens his inventory. He thinks there's only one thing he can do. Then he starts to build another wall with the bricks and says that if one doesn't work, he will put more and more. Then he tells the boar to try its best to break it, despite not knowing how dumb the monster is. And then from the top of his construction, Daun yells that the wall won't break easily and calls the boar that is running straight at him. The monster hits its horn hard against the wall. Then the protagonist starts to sweat coldly and lets out an uh-oh. And in a matter of seconds again, the boar destroyed the wall and knocks down Daun. As he is falling, the protagonist realizes he underestimated the strength of the monster. The boar's attacks are very destructive. Daeyuan realizes that the leak will return if the monster continues breaking everything like this. His room is already completely destroyed, leaving him sad to see this since he spent so much time making it. Then Daeyuan opens his inventory again and says he won't be defeated easily and that it's time to use a skill he's been training. The monster stops for a second. A large piece of earth starts to come out of the protagonist's inventory. This intimidates the boar. Daeyuan then asks if it has ever heard of an earth bomb. Then he yells that any monster will die instantly with that attack. The monster is paralyzed, and Daeyuan shouts the name of his attack. But as he holds the earth bomb in his hands, he realizes something. A cloud of dust rises. Daeyuan threw his earth bomb, but it didn't go very far. He looks at his failure and starts to laugh nervously, saying he messed up again. The irritated boar snorts through its nostrils. Then Daeyuan starts to run away from the boar, lamenting that he never had enough strength to throw the earth bomb. He starts to build small mounds of bricks to climb, but he is hit. The boar was faster. Daeyuan is thrown spitting blood, then he falls to the ground. The cave continues to shake with each attack of the monster. Daeyuan starts to get up trembling, and thinks to himself that it wasn't a direct attack, but hurt a lot. He calls the boar a bastard and says there's nowhere to run. Then he starts to wonder what to do, because he's sure he'll die if he can't think of something. Then Daeyuan starts to think that if he could kill the boar, he could use its meat to make pork barbecue, and starts to drool. Then immediately he starts to raise walls around him, and yells, calling the boar barbecue. The monster charges with everything again while the protagonist uses his digging ability. The boar was going to attack, but something happens. A hole appears under it before it could hit the wall. Daeyuan from above says he has to put an end to the monster's destruction. The boar falls and lets out a grunt, staring at the protagonist. Daeyuan says he thinks the monster doesn't understand what's going to happen. He then continues and says he's very pissed off and asks like a gangster if the boar is going to compensate him because it took a long time to build that place. The monster is now intimidated, and the protagonist then says the boar will have to pay with its body for the disrespect it had. Then Daeyuan says goodbye while releasing several balls of earth on the monster. Nearby was the rabbit watching the scene. He is shocked by what just happened. Then he wonders if the protagonist was really just from the artisan class, and questions if an apparently useless skill could be used in that way. While Daeyuan prepares his blade to make his barbecue, the guide thinks the protagonist is too creative with the skills he has and is too dangerous. The narration says that the average level of the skills of the players who cleared the first phase is level 3. The levels of the skills increase according to the frequency they are used, and when they meet certain requirements, some players can even gain new skills. The effects of the skills are absolute. In addition, to pass the phase, players must always be leveling up their skills. But it shows the guy with the axe cutting off the arm of a giant golem that even after that attack, the monster still manages to retaliate and throw the man away. While the golem regenerates its arm, the narration says that raising the levels of the skills in a life or death fight is not easy. Back in the cave, the rabbit has the same incredulous face as always, thinking that the digging skill is at a very high level because Daeyuan uses it all the time. While the protagonist is unearthing the boar, the guide thinks to himself that his skill is not even combat. Daeyuan spots the rabbit and calls him to see the boar. The guide already starts to get irritated, thinking that the protagonist is a pest in the dungeon. Sometime later, Daeyuan is sharpening his blade, and with 2 knives, he approaches the boar to start preparing the meat. While cutting, he thinks to himself that slaughter is only about speed, and that the meat can spoil if not treated soon. Within 2 hours in a room temperature place, he says his skill might be able to kill the bacteria, but spoiled meat doesn't taste good. He continues preparing the meat, removing the tendons and separating the fat. When finished, he asks the guide what he thought. The rabbit gets irritated again, saying the protagonist is very noisy and asks who he's talking to. Daeyuan says that if you start living alone in such a place, it gets very boring if you don't talk to yourself. The guide says he knows how he feels. The two end up feeling an unexpected empathy and look away. Outside, the day has already dawned. Daeyuan is scraping the boar's skull on the wall, and then makes a roasting pan using the horn as a handle. He then takes it to the fire for a test. He comments that the tendons have dried and can be used as rope, while the rabbit wonders if the protagonist is some kind of caveman. But Daeyuan says the best part was getting fat since oil is essential, and says the torches are almost out and he was worried about how he was going to keep them lit. He puts the fat in the pan to melt and then puts it in a glass jar, and comments that the smell is stronger than yesterday and it must be delicious. The rabbit grumbles and says the monsters will be attracted by the smell, but Daeyuan smiles and says he's already thought of a way. He leaves the roasting pan on the fire, steps back a bit, and pulls a spike from his inventory, leaving the spike on the ground. The protagonist then says the rabbit said the other day that falling into that trap is certain death, and says he can use that trap for hunting. The rabbit makes a face of displeasure while Daeyuan says he saves some spikes in the inventory, but they reappear with each reset. Then he finishes placing the spikes on the ground and asks what he thought. The guide says the monsters are not idiots and they won't come with the protagonist saying there's a trap there. Dae-yoon even says that from now on there will be something to eat every day, and when the guide asks what he's talking about, the protagonist says that with the smell of pork barbecue, another type of monster might fall in there. Right after that, they hear a noise. The rabbit looks in disbelief. There at the opening of the hole is another boar, and the guide already starts saying that it's not a place for him to enter. But it's no use, and the creature jumps into the hole. The rabbit yells, calling him a stupid pig. When falling, the boar causes a rumble that raises a lot of dust. Dae-yoon looks and celebrates seeing that his plan worked and that he caught another one. The guy gets irritated and starts asking why the hell the boar jumped. Dae-yoon, almost drooling, gives a little laugh and says he won't have to worry about food anymore, while the rabbit keeps repeating that he hates him. Time passes in a new season, and soon there's another boar at the edge of the hole. He was attracted by the smell and drools from above, seeing Dae-yoon's barbecue, and smelling that succulent meat he can't resist, and jumps all in without knowing he's going straight to his death. When he falls down there, he starts to grunt, and when he looks up, there is Dae-yoon saying he is bigger than yesterday's boar. The protagonist, all happy and humming, welcomes him. Dae-yoon is by the fire roasting the meat. When he goes to get another piece in the bowl, he hears a rumble, and everything shakes. However, the protagonist looks unconcerned, and then he sees that he caught another one and says they are not smart, and that he's getting tired of them showing up all the time. And then he says they could at least make their meat taste bad since he's starting to get fat from eating so much. But suddenly a glow appears around him. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone holding two blood-soaked swords says it's over. It's Seo-inju almost died this time. His group appears asking if he's hurt. He says he's fine and asks if the group is okay. The other group members are amazed to see a mountain of boars that Seo-in killed alone. He says he was fortunately not hurt and asks how things went on the side where Yahello Hyunjin went. Yahello is the guy who uses an axe. He says he had a lot of people with him and apologizes for having separated from Seo-inji and for not being able to help. Seo-in says it's okay and that he won something. Then he says he killed 100 horned boars and gained a skill. The system shows the achievement, Horned Boar Slayer, and the reward is the skill strength of the horned boar. Everyone in the group is surprised that there is such a skill. Seo-in explains that the skill is limited as it lasts 10 seconds and has a cooldown of 100. But then one of his colleagues comments that the skill increases strength and vitality. Yahello says it's an incredible skill and that Seo-inji is becoming a monster. But Seo-inji is embarrassed to hear such praise. The archer boy happily celebrates, saying that such a skill is amazing, like putting wings on the back of a tiger. He says he's happy that Seo-inji is on their side. Yahello comments that the duration should increase and the cooldown should decrease as the levels pass. The archer boy hugs Seo-in, and this makes him embarrassed. However, the celebration is interrupted by a noise. Seo-in then says they have to go back to the cave. The boy says it's a waste to leave the boars like that, and comments that they would get a lot of meat if they clean the boars. The guy with glasses asks when was the last time they ate meat and comments that it's frustrating that all monsters have toxins, then says it's as if they're being told to die of hunger since there's not much food but there are many monsters. The archer boy comments that if only Dae-yoon were there he could purify the meat. But Hoil yells the boy's name, Yoon-ji Sasu. The boy is a bit embarrassed and says he only thought of Dae-yoon as a cook and didn't think losing him would be so problematic. Seo-in asks if he really thinks that and says the goal of the game is not to win fights but to survive. And then he says that from that point of view the combat class is the most necessary because it has a clear goal and rewards. But then he asks what happened on the days they couldn't fight, remembering how Dae-yoon distributed help to everyone when they were exhausted. He delivered the food with a smile on his face. Seo-in then says the protagonist was fighting for them at those times, and says he was the strongest among them all. Yahello shows a sharpening stone made by Dae-yoon and says he would have died with a blunt axe if it weren't for it. Yoon-ji apologizes and says he won't say that kind of thing again. Seo-in smiles and tells them to return. The group gets excited and talks about eating potatoes, but soon remembers that it was also Dae-yoon who got the potatoes and realized that everything is related to him. Back in the cave, there's meat being roasted, and the protagonist, with a gleam in his eyes, celebrates, saying this is what lifestyle is all about. But the guide complains, saying he is too noisy, and asks if he has been possessed by some chatty ghost. Dae-yoon, with his mouth full, says that apparently the rabbit doesn't know the joy of eating and says that reaction is important when eating something tasty. He starts to say something, but says the guide wouldn't know, then the little rabbit says he does. Dae-yoon asks if he already knew that you can't eat horned boar because it has toxins, and says that if you use the purification ability on the meat, the toxins disappear and only a slightly bitter taste remains. This means it's good even without salt. The guy gets annoyed and says he doesn't need to know these nonsensical things and that one day he will kill him. But the protagonist starts to laugh. Then another rumble happens. Dae-yoon sees that another boar has fallen into the trap. The guy gets even more irritated and says those stupid pigs should have stopped jumping there by now. The protagonist says maybe their brains also reset and says he's tired because 2 or 3 jump there every day after the reset. The rabbit says he's going to go crazy, and then he's surprised. It's astonished to see Daun lift the boar and starts asking when he got so strong. The protagonist says it's a skill and tells the guide to keep turning the meat so it doesn't burn. The rabbit is astonished and asks about the skill. Then he says the skill was the strength of the horned boar and says he'll be right back. The guide is totally disbelieving and wonders if the protagonist is talking about the horned boar slayer achievement. Then he wonders how someone with a useless class got it, while Daun carries the giant boar as if it were nothing. Daun climbs out of the hole and comments that he should build some kind of entrance. When he gets to the top, he is startled to see the rabbit looking downcast and asks what happened. The guide, completely dumbfounded, asks if the skill the protagonist mentioned was from the horned boar slayer achievement. Daun says yes, and the rabbit says it's impossible because you can only get it after killing 100 boars. The protagonist then explains that he caught the 100 boars with a trap. The rabbit says something is wrong because the dungeon has reset several times. Daun asks what that has to do with it, and the guide replies that when the dungeon resets, the count also resets, and that there are only about 40 boars up there. The protagonist with a silly face comments that it seems his numbers stay the same even with the resets and asks if that wasn't supposed to happen. The little rabbit gets irritated and calls him a bug human while Daun wonders if all the monsters he kills will count. Thinking he might get another achievement when he kills 100 more, he reflects that it would be difficult to do without a group. The guy gets irritated and says the protagonist is starting to look like a pig now that he's eating them every day. Daun asks if there's a weight change system, but the rabbit doesn't know. Meanwhile, outside it's a beautiful day. On a tree branch, a squirrel walks near a nest. He is gnawing on a bone, until he accidentally drops it. Then he quickly descends from the tree. But when he gets down, he sees a hole in the ground near the tree, and he tenses up when he realizes his bone fell straight into that hole. He stares a bit before entering. After a while, he comes out of a small hole. That leads directly into the protagonist's cave. He starts to explore, looking around, and when he gets to the kitchen, he is surprised to see all that. A little further ahead, he finds his bone, and he runs to grab it. But he is surprised to see the carcass of a horned boar. It was love at first sight. Sometime later, he returns to the tree all excited, with a twinkle in his eyes. More time passed and he returned to the hole, and this repeated day and night, without the other squirrels knowing, and it became routine. He entered the cave all calm, and there were always more bones there. So he ate them all, until he saw something, a bowl full of bones, and he went straight to eat what was in it too. He picked up a bone from the bowl without hesitation. He was a little intrigued by it, but it only took one bite to feel a flavor explosion, and he was ecstatic. He soon started eating more and more amazed. He continued eating the bones from the bowl, until he notices something. The bowl was on top of the protagonist. Then he is worried when he remembers the old squirrel teaching that humans are dangerous, and he starts to leave, afraid that the protagonist will get up and attack him. But the temptation of the bowl is too strong. He tries to resist. He makes a determined look, focused, but he goes back to eating the bones. Daun, who was pretending to sleep, sees this and is happy. Then he celebrates that he found another living being after spending months living alone in that cave, and says it's good that the squirrel feeds on bones because he is very careful and didn't know how to approach him. While Daun is being careful thinking about how to make friends, the squirrel realizes he is awake. The protagonist worries that he might run away, but the squirrel continues eating the bones. Daun is moved by so much cuteness, so he slowly tries to pet him. The little squirrel notices and lets him. Daun is all happy that it worked, and again a glow appears. The system shows the achievement of Earth's squirrel friend for having tamed the little squirrel, and then says the dungeon admires this unexpected friendship. Daun wonders if they give these things out regularly and remembers that when he was with the group he couldn't get any. Then he thinks about his new achievement and says he doesn't know if it's worth anything but thanks the little squirrel for calling him a friend. Then he starts thinking about using POKKYU as the name of the little animal, since that's the sound it makes. The little squirrel seems to like the name. Daun is astonished to see that POKKYU apparently understands him and wonders if it's the reward for the achievement. Then he tells the little squirrel to sit and even thinks that maybe it's hard for him to understand. But POKKYU sits down right after. He is impressed to see that the squirrel really understands him and even asks him to hold his hand. And then he asks POKKYU. At that instant, the squirrel jumps from his hand. Daun wonders if he didn't understand. But POKKYU waits for the protagonist, and then points in the direction indicating for Daun to follow him. The protagonist then sees the wall through which POKKYU entered and uses his digging ability to enlarge the hole. As he climbs through the tunnel, he wonders if the squirrel noticed that entrance because it's smaller. Then he remembers that every time he tried to dig an exit, he ended up facing stone walls. Daun dug several tunnels looking for an exit and was almost giving up. However, he is surprised when he notices something. It is already possible to see a tree root where POKKYU entered. Then DAUN gets emotional to see that he will finally be able to get out, and soon celebrates, saying that he will finally be able to have some hope. He knows that if he climbs the roots, he will be able to get outside. As he continues climbing, the protagonist is excited because he will finally be able to end this life under the earth. He can already see the sunlight, so he keeps climbing. After so much time, he finally can see the outside world again, with birds singing in the sky and the soft grass on the ground. DAUN can't contain himself with that view, and starts to cry with emotion for finally being able to see the sky full of clouds and grass that seems endless. He says it's just a normal landscape with some sheep, but it seems so different. While he says it's welcoming and friendly, his speech is interrupted when he sees one of the little sheep suddenly attacked by a fierce wolf. DAUN gets nervous and says that survival of the fittest is also part of nature, while there are several predatory looks in the forest. As the other wolves start to move, he thinks the feeling of being alive didn't need to be so realistic. The protagonist starts to sweat coldly and turns pale because he knows that packs of wolves are known for having no mercy, and then thinks it's unfair to die right after escaping. The wolves start to growl and go on the attack. DAUN already prepares for the worst. Then he crouches, but the wolves pass straight by. He doesn't understand, and he is relieved because the wolves were focused on the sheep and didn't see him. He asks if POKKYU knows another way because that place doesn't seem safe. But right behind him, another wolf appears. DAUN tries to stay calm, thinking that this one's attention is also on the sheep, but the wolf has its eye on the protagonist. DAUN runs back through the hole, yelling at the wolf and calling it an idiot. The protagonist says the entrance is too tight for the monster to enter, but it didn't take long for the wolf to break everything and manage to enter. At that moment, despair hits DAUN, who keeps running and apologizing for calling the monster an idiot. He realizes the tunnels are too narrow and there's no escape. Then DAUN opens the inventory and decides that since it's just one wolf, he will finish it off. And he starts to build a wall, thinking that compared to the boar, the wolf is much weaker. But before he could finish his thought, the wolf leaps and attacks him, which draws blood from DAUN. He can't believe it. The wolf is extremely fast. DAUN realizes his situation is bad. The wolf missed that blow but will attack again. The protagonist wonders if he will be able to escape or if there's another way, and then he realizes he won't be able to run for long and that he has to end this. Then an idea comes to his mind. He says he still has that, and there's nothing more he can do. The wolf leaps to attack him again. DAUN says it's him or the monster while a blue aura begins to emanate. Then he lands a powerful punch on the wolf after activating the strength of the horned boar. The monster is thrown far away with DAUN's punch. He is even impressed and wonders if he hit. He realizes the effect of the skill is incredible. The system shows that his physical attributes will be temporarily doubled. Then DAUN confirms that now that he tried to fight, he knows his skill is indeed incredible. But the wolf gets up angry. The protagonist knows he managed to damage the monster, but he is sad it wasn't a one-hit kill. The system shows there are 7 seconds left of the skill, and DAUN thinks to himself that the duration is his biggest weakness. And then with 6 seconds left, he has no time to waste and charges with everything. The wolf prepares for the attack, but DAUN is faster and manages to jump and dodge to the side of the monster. Before the wolf could react, the protagonist lands another powerful punch on the wolf's ribs, and with a determined look, he hopes the monster dies. DAUN continues to deliver a barrage of punches, so many punches that dust rises even from the outside. The protagonist is already tired, and the system shows there are still 3 seconds left, but the wolf is still standing. Again it charges, but DAUN manages to dodge with a leap. Then he quickly opens the inventory, pulls one of the spikes while there are 2 seconds left, and yells for the wolf to die already as he prepares to attack with the spike. The monster growls at him, but DAUN manages to hit the spike on the wolf, but the monster attacks him with its tail. This attack ends up throwing the protagonist against the wall. Even with the spike embedded in its neck, the wolf is still alive, while DAUN wonders how this damn thing has so much energy, and says this won't end easily. The system shows that the strength of the boar is on a cooldown of 99 seconds. The wolf stares at him angrily, but DAUN has understood the pattern of the monster. Its most dangerous attack is when it leaps to slash using its front claws, but after that, this attack is on cooldown. The protagonist asks if they can't have a truce for just 90 seconds, but the wolf launches another attack. As DAUN prepares to launch his last attack, the monster is about to bite him. At that moment, the protagonist says he should have used his paw. Then before the wolf could bite him, DAUN uses the digging ability right into the wolf's mouth, and the monster is caught by surprise. Sometime later in the cave, the guide appears wondering what happened since the protagonist isn't making meat. He says something is wrong, and says that DAUN must be doing something bad until he finds him. The rabbit can't believe that the protagonist is dressed in bone armor, Daun says the armor turned out quite good for something made in a day. He says he made it because many dangerous things happen these days. The guide is shocked to see the skull of a plains wolf and wonders if Daun finally found a way up there. The protagonist says yes, and the rabbit already asks why he is still there. Then he says it must be because that place is comfortable and tells Daun to keep living there. Then he comments that the protagonist even got a little pet. But Daun, determined, says he will leave. However, he cannot leave without preparing, as he only survived by pure luck. Because of the danger, the rabbit tells him to stay there. Then Daun says he still plans to use the base for a while. Now that the problems are clear, he needs to start making his preparations. The rabbit asks Daun to just give up and die, but ends up leaving the protagonist in a good mood, and the rabbit calls him a curse bug. Sometime later, Daun is training with the strength of the boar, lifting weights, and running while thinking to himself that the more he increases his physical stats, the stronger the skill's increase will be. Since he is using the skill a lot, the system shows that its level has increased and even the duration and cooldown have improved. Daun reflects that he was lucky last time, but wolves move in packs, and even if he tries to face them one by one, there are no guarantees that it will work. He uses a slaughtered boar as a punching bag, while thinking that he has to get stronger. The system shows that the strength of the boar has risen to level 3, making the physical stats stronger, the duration longer, and the cooldown shorter again. Then he activates this skill and delivers a series of punches to the boar. Daun lands a powerful punch. With a determined look, he says he will no longer run away. In the forests, some wolves are quite carefree until they notice something coming their way. Suddenly, Daun jumps out of the bushes. He's happy to find only 2 wolves. Then the protagonist activates the strength of the boar and throws a thorn at one of them. The other manages to dodge and already advances towards Daun. He then says he will show the result of his training and lands a punch that makes the monster fly and hit a tree. The impact was so strong that it destroyed the tree. Right behind the protagonist appears the first wolf about to bite him, but he has already noticed and says he knew it wouldn't die with just one hit. Then he lands another punch on the wolf and says he will hit it as many times as necessary. While the monster is thrown to the ground, the second wolf gets up. During the fight, the guide realizes that he has become very strong, and Daun himself feels full of power and wonders if this feeling means he is strong. He then says he feels he won't lose and wonders if he has become unbelievably strong. But the rabbit cuts his wave and says he's not that much since Seoeng could kill 10 wolves in a second. Daun says anyone is weak compared to Seoeng, but the rabbit says the boy Jian Duhu killed 3 wolves alone. Suddenly, one of the wolves starts to howl, and the rabbit mocks the protagonist, saying that now the pack is coming. He warns that about 3 wolves are coming and that Daun is lucky because usually there are more than 5. Then he asks if the protagonist will be able to defeat them all before the skill's time runs out and asks him to show his power. Daun then asks if the guide knows what the best part of his skill is. Then he says it's the increase in physical stats that is now 2.4x, which means he can run away 2.4x faster than normal. The guide is incredulous and asks if he's really going to run away. Then he asks if the protagonist doesn't have the honor to face them, but Daun says he only cares about something called life. Right after that, he jumps back into the cave hole. The rabbit says that usually players get obsessed and fight so much that they end up dying. Then he gets angry and tells the wolves to attack that hole. But Daun makes an earth wall and prevents them from entering. The monsters even try to dig, but it doesn't work, leaving the guide trembling with rage. He yells, calling the protagonist a damned bug player, and swears that one day he will kill him. Inside the cave, Daun says he managed to find some isolated wolves thanks to POK, but now that they are in a pack, it's not easy to deal with, and then wonders what to do. He made 7 escape routes in the area where there are no stone walls, and now knows he can withstand fighting more than 2 wolves. But he is worried that something unexpected will happen like last time, and he won't be able to close the entrance in time. Even if he flees to the hole, there's nowhere he can hide. So he tells POKK that he has no choice but to need his help. Daun asks his little squirrel to find the wolves that have separated from the pack, and tells him not to get too close and to be careful. Then he says he will start the preparations. Outside there are 3 wolves that have just hunted a sheep. Daun is going to put his plan into practice and says the distance is perfect. Then he opens the inventory. Meanwhile, the guide is watching, asking if he is some kind of mole for having made so many holes in the region. The protagonist says the rabbit has this horrible habit of appearing behind people. The guide then grumbles and says the most important thing is to know what Daun is going to do, and asks if he's going to shoot a laser beam or something like that. Then the protagonist says it's almost that and says this is his long-range combat art. The rabbit says he doesn't have any such skill, but Daun says it's possible to throw earth balls using the strength of the boar. Then he activates the skill and throws a thorn as if it were a spear, saying this is the safety first attack. The wolves are far away and unconcerned, until the attack passes close but doesn't hit any of the monsters. The rabbit starts laughing and asks if Daun didn't mean wolves' safety first. The protagonist throws another spear and misses again. Then the guide says it looks like it's going to end in hand-to-hand combat, and that's what they call lack of experience. The plains wolves have the highest agility in Phase 1, and that distance is no problem for them. Daun then says that despite this, they can't dodge in the air. So he throws the earth balls and says it's going as he planned. The guide asks if he really thinks this is going to work, and says there's no point in trying to buy time with earth balls because they'll destroy them in an instant. But a ball hits the wolf right in the face. The guide is astonished and can't believe it. Daun says the rabbit is underestimating the balls too much and that earth is heavier than he thinks. Then he says he used his dating ability to increase their density to the point of weighing 20 kilograms, and with the strength of the boar, he can throw them as if they were bowling balls. The guide is again shocked and can't believe those balls weigh 20 kilograms. In a few seconds, Daun managed to knock down 2 wolves. Only the last one remains. Then the rabbit comments that wolves hunt in groups and they have good teamwork, while Daun has his back turned. The third wolf leaps and attacks from behind while the guide thinks it was checkmate. However, he managed to defend himself from the attack by placing his arms in the way, but he was still thrown far away while the wolf waited to see what happened. Still recovering from the beast's charge, he didn't notice that the wolf was approaching to feast on him, and the rabbit celebrated because he wanted that annoying player to go to heaven soon. Hoping, the rabbit asked the wolf to attack him immediately and finish the guy off. The rabbit laughed at the scene as the good sad as he is. Daun was now inside the wolf's jaws. As the fierce attack continued, the rabbit watched everything from afar, hoping that things would go as he planned. However, something unexpected happened. The wolf felt its teeth breaking. The rabbit, observing the scene, expected anything but that. Daun's armor was more resistant than the beast's teeth and caused them to break when biting him. Taking advantage of the distraction, he managed to move his arms enough to free himself a bit from that dangerous mouth. He was finally in a safer position while the wolf tried to recover from the damage it inflicted on itself. Daun was pleased with the effectiveness of that armor, and if it weren't for it, he would have become a snack. The horned boars are the most powerful beasts of that level. The wolf's fangs are nothing compared to those bones. Even so, the force was felt by the guy's body and he suffered moderate damage. The status window signaled that he still had 8 seconds to use the boar's ability. At that moment, he tried to regain his calm to plan an attack. The time was more than enough, and he started manipulating something in his hands. Daun, with the earth sphere, assumed a posture to throw it at the wolf. Finally, he was prepared to do it. With the wolf in his sights, Daun threw the projectile towards the injured wolf. A great explosion occurred in the forest. The rabbit, still watching, didn't like the way things had turned out. He then asked if the guy had finished off the wolf that lay in front of him. Definitely, this was not the result desired by the rabbit, who wanted the player in the wolf's place. Daun's strategy was to use a chain of tunnels, attack stray wolves, and then flee. That strategy is definitely efficient, but at a certain point, they began to be vigilant with the tunnels. They just didn't expect to be watched by the squirrel, who promptly relayed the information to his friend. Using it, he took the opportunity to train when an attack became too risky. The training caused his skill to level up more and more until the wolves were no longer able to resist. The forest apparently was at peace, but within it, Daun was controlling the wolf population. The rabbit couldn't believe that human was still alive. The anger he felt for him only grew, as did the desire to resolve the situation himself. And he said the guy was a coward for the way he attacked them. But his armor was already almost completely destroyed and it was necessary to keep him safe. He decided to discard it and might make another one in the future. Who knows? Daun noticed that the day was very calm, and they should have already arrived because of the howls, for he knew he hadn't finished off all the wolves in the forest. The rabbit was completely unable to hide his annoyance, and Daun asked what was wrong with him. Then he happily asked if he had finished off all the wolves. The rabbit said he was a coward and would soon die while he celebrated being able to deal with all the wolves. And he also said that if he found other players, he should tell them where they were, but the rabbit wished he would perish and said he wouldn't do that. Daun celebrated the success of his strategy and was now ready to move on to the next step. He needed to defeat the boss but knew he couldn't do it alone. So he needed to find more players and join them. Now he was in the plains forest. With 10 days left until the reset, he imagined they would soon pass through there. But he recognized that it would be problematic if they were far away. A loud sound echoed through the forest. In the middle of it, there was a small clearing. In that clearing, a group of players was confronting a pack of wolves. They knew the wolves were fierce, and on that occasion, there were many of them. One of the players blamed the situation on his colleague and they argued. The rabbit passed by there, completely downcast. He looked at the group of players and realized they were having the expected tense behavior. To him, that was what was missing in the dungeon. More tension. The wolves advanced towards the people. The rabbit rejoiced in the scene and hoped the pack would take care of everyone. He wanted no player to remain so that Daun would have no hope of getting out of there or living for long. One of the wolves is thrown far away. A player with an axe is responsible for it, and it was just as the rabbit imagined. Not everyone is weak. He noticed that the old man was hiding an ability for emergency situations. Wind Blade. The stronger the weapon is swung, the more damage it inflicts. However, this is an ability that can also hit allies. The players ask him to restrain himself as he could hit them too, but the old man ignores them. Either he does that, or everyone becomes a snack. Only the strongest survive. The rabbit loved it. This was the spirit of the dungeon. The most cruel monsters are always the humans. The rabbit hopes that the reckless one ends up killing all of his allies because if everyone dies, Dalan will be left alone. But the guy is planning his life thinking he should go to a higher place. Dalan is happy to have gotten out but doesn't know what to do now, and the rabbit will take him to them. He asks Pakyu if he can imagine where the others might be. He wants to know where the humans are, and the squirrel becomes thoughtful. But he gave up insisting because he knows his friend doesn't know everything. He can't search because it might put him in danger, but he also can't face the boss alone. He thinks about building something to help him find them, like an observatory. It's a waste to think too much and not execute, and he is confident in his building skills. And for that, he'll need to get above the tree canopy. So he started summoning earth bricks. The walls will be made of earth, and it will be easier to do since he has experience with the material. It might collapse since there's no cement, but he learned a technique that could reduce this risk. He brings his hand close to the bricks. He can change the shape of the object with his hand and intends to fuse the bricks with his digging technique. It's not a stack of bricks, but rather earth, and it won't collapse so easily. By the end of the day, he managed to accomplish a lot and was quite tired. In about 10 hours, he completed the task. He looks up at the sky from where he stands, and he contemplates the beauty of the forming twilight. Far away, blood flies through the sky. The rabbit roots for the conflict and says they'll need that food if they want to fight tomorrow. He is pleased that the players have adapted well to the game, and he comes across a type of person he doesn't like who is looting a body. He thinks that this player must have many items in his inventory. The guy doesn't know, and the rabbit introduces himself as the guide of all this. He said he hadn't spoken to him, but that construction wasn't there yesterday. It's the first time the rabbit sees something like this. He is upset, and only one person there could be capable of that. At the top of the tower, Davlin is building something else tired. His hands are quite shaky, and he finally completes that small object. The rabbit appears beside him and asks what he is doing. He says that he scared him and that it's important, and that the rabbit should be working. But he says Dalan only does things that hinder his work. He said that Dalan has a lot of free time and that now he stopped making tunnels and is making towers. Dalan asks the rabbit how long he thinks it took him to make that tower. He said it only took 4 hours, and the rabbit didn't believe it. It was difficult at first, but it got easier with the skills he acquired through achievements. Just with that tower, there were 2. The first was as an observatory. Everything he sees from there appears on his map, and he shows it to the rabbit. It's updated in real time and even differentiates hostile monsters and players for neutral people. The rabbit doesn't believe it, and Dalan said he has already tested it. Nalvin wants to know what other achievement he obtained. He imagines he got it when he finished the 5th tower. A beam of light appeared. Builder's reward, a new building skill was granted to him, and the construction time was reduced by half. He said it helped him so much that he didn't even need to rest. With the skill, he builds so quickly that he can invest his time in interior decoration. He pointed to a place where he said he would put the bed, much to the rabbit's displeasure. He imagines Dylan has completely lost his mind since he is getting so many achievements. If he finds other players, they could turn that into a giant park, and the rabbit doesn't want that to happen. He is too dangerous alone and will make sure he stays that way. Dalan asks if the rabbit is already leaving, and asks him where he can find more people because he hasn't found anyone yet. The next day, the players observe the tower that wasn't there the previous day. The rabbit appears near them and gives a sinister laugh. He tells them to follow him to the tower because he has a surprise for them. One of them says the rabbit is a liar and shouldn't be listened to. He must be leading them to a powerful monster, so they should change their path. The rabbit pretends to be innocent and says it took him a long time to prepare that. But they change their path, and the rabbit is happy to have fooled them. He continued doing this so Dalan wouldn't find other players, and allowed them to take the easier path just to buy time. Maybe this way Dalan would perish. Now the time has come to finish them all. Dalan analyzes tracks on the ground, but it's just a group of monsters. But something on the map catches his attention. There were many signals on the map now. 10 signals appeared there suddenly. Then even more appeared, so many that he couldn't count them. Dalan is scared because he can't imagine what it could be. A monstrous rat is running, and with it, there's a horde of other rats. They are advancing through the forest without stopping, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The trees tremble with their advance. If Dalan had taken any longer, he would be in trouble and is glad to be near his tower. Every 4 weeks after the reset, the rats descend from the mountains, devouring everything in their path. Dalan had been counting the days for this, but forgot for a brief moment. Another reset is on the way, and it's at this moment that he has an epiphany. If players don't appear on the map, it's because they've died or moved on to the next stage. He thinks he can stop looking for them now and head to the beginning. The squirrel tries to say something to him and makes a funny face. Dalan says they don't need to worry about the rats. They just need to pay attention to the map. A large gate stands before them. The players, despite the adversities, have managed to reach it, but they don't know how to defeat that enormous golem. Swords are useless against it. The golem prepares to attack them. The bald guy says he's going to take down the golem because he's very tough. He gets ready to strike the golem with his mace. The other players are stunned by the scene. The weapon was on the ground, and there was a lot of tomato sauce. The monster advances unstoppably towards them. The player is terrified by this, because he imagines there's nothing he can do against it. He asks for God's help. The golem is ready to finish him off, but something hits it from the side. The golem's hand fell with that impact. The player gives thanks, but the woman tells him to look in the direction of the attack. A brick was flying through the sky. Dalan has arrived and is using the boar's strength to throw bricks. This golem is different from the map monsters, so it's possible that it's the boss. The player doesn't know why Dalan is so strong, and the woman asks him to be careful. The golem continues attacking with its remaining hand. Dalan prepares to throw another brick. This time it hits the side of the monster's head. A large hole is formed. Now it turns towards Dalan. The golem is enraged by this trick. Dalan realizes that it might be better to run now. The golem is fast and is already very close to him. Dalan doesn't know what to do now, and he remembered when they defeated the boar. They stretched a rope across his path, causing the beast to fall, and so they managed to strike its vulnerable belly. Dalan said that it was very well planned. Sung said it was nothing and uttered a cliche phrase. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Dalan throws another brick at the golem. This one hits its leg at knee height. Dalan waits for the impact's result. The other players watch, very surprised. The golem began to fall to the ground. Dalan is pleased with the result and thanks Sung for the advice. The golem tries to get up after the fall. It doesn't move and must be trying to regenerate its missing leg. But that didn't matter because now Dalan had plenty of time to finish off that immobile monster. And he throws another brick at it, but nothing happens. The brick falls to the ground and the golem remains intact. A window appears for Dalan, startling him. The boar's strength is on cooldown and will take 70 seconds until it can be used again. The golem is now fully regenerated and ready to finish off the players. It attacks Dalan, who manages to dodge. He fell nearby and prepares to react. Dalan arms himself with an earth brick in his hand. He threw it at the golem, but nothing happened. The golem, enraged, brings his arms together. He doesn't understand what it's doing. The monster begins to concentrate its strength and prepares to strike the ground with all his might. He slams the ground, causing the earth to tremble. The other players are terrified and wonder what happened to the guy. The woman still holds out hope that nothing has happened and thinks they shouldn't just stand there watching. Her companion is too scared to think of anything. There's not much that can be done against that thing. The woman runs toward the golem. The guy yells, asking what she's going to do. Dava knows he just needs a little more time, and something hits the golem's face from a distance. The woman is there now, protecting him. She wants to know what she can do to help him defeat that thing. Dalan says he just needs 1 more minute, nothing more. That's too much time, and she wants to know if 10 seconds will do. But Dalan can't do anything about the time and warns her of the imminent danger. The golem is about to strike her now. He executes his strike without mercy. The woman closes her eyes, fearing the worst. Feeling that she's still alive, she opens her eyes cautiously. The other players are there now, helping them. They are a team and wouldn't leave her alone, and they ask Dalan what to do. He tells them to attack the golem's chest. It's difficult to attack there, but he saw the golem protecting that area. There must be something there. They cling to the monster, and the woman goes to help them too. She launches a fireball in its direction, and it hits the chest directly. The armor was damaged and a light shone from that spot. The golem places its arms over its chest to protect itself. That was what Dalan needed to see. The guy asks if it was only him who saw that. Now everyone is motivated and knows they need to attack the monster's chest. Dalan checks his screen to see if he can use his ability yet. Meanwhile, the other players continue fighting the golem. The golem defends itself as best it can, and it's stronger than they imagined. Dalan notices that the monster seems to be made of earth. If it's made of earth, he has an advantage. And it finally dawns on him that it's made of clay. If that's the case, he should be able to control this monster. The golem opens its arms, throwing the players away. Dalan runs towards it. The woman asks if a minute has already passed. Dalan nods affirmatively to her. It's been a long time, he just didn't have enough information to attack. The golem regenerates, so it needed to be studied. And those people risked themselves, so he could react. The time he gained allowed him to plan his attack. He's grateful to them for their effort. He crouches down and is already using the boar's strength. He jumped towards the golem with it. The players watch Dalan in amazement. The woman also can't believe what she's seeing. Dalan is high up, heading towards the golem. He prepares one of his hands to attack, and manages to pierce its chest, going right through it. He looks back as the beast loses its balance. The golem now collapses into a great pile of earth. Dalan is pleased that his strategy worked. The other players also celebrate. The woman is happy that everything worked out. Now his digging ability has reached level 9. The experience was so much that he also reached level 10. The boar's strength is now at level 5. The players go to him, cheering him on as they manage to defeat that beast. The rabbit is furious with their success. He burns with hatred for Dalan. The players begin to complain to the rabbit, who promised to send them home as soon as they defeated the boss. He's upset that Delon's ability worked on the golem. He's deeply irritated by this. He says the game isn't over and that they have to go to the next stage soon. The woman asks what the next stage is. His umbrella begins to glow. A door opens and he tells the players to enter it quickly. They are disheartened because they didn't expect more stages. The woman is a little thoughtful about this and encourages her companions because there's nothing more to do there. One of them decides to pass through the portal right away. They thank Delon and the rabbit hurries them along. The woman says Delon was very brave. He thanks her and asks her to go ahead. They head to the portal for the next stage. Delon prepares to go through as well. He waves goodbye to the rabbit, who is seething with rage. But as soon as he tries to pass, he is immediately barred. The system blocked him, apparently for no reason. He tells the rabbit to fix it quickly, but the rabbit says the system rejected him. Delon has no idea what to do now, and the rabbit is thinking the exact same thing. A week after the reset has passed, Delon's clothes are spread out on the floor of the cave. There are also several bones scattered around the area. The guy is lying down staring at the ceiling. He's bored and says he can't keep living like this. He goes to the water source to drink a little. After washing his face, he starts thinking a bit more. The squirrel stayed with him and the base wasn't reset, but the towers he had built disappeared after the reset. The surface resets while the underground remains intact. He wonders if this part is considered part of the dungeon or not. Then he notices something. The system's creator only placed him in a place that already existed, so he can build anywhere as long as it's not through the system. South and west are deserts, to the north are the ruins, and to the east is the mountain of rats. He doesn't have enough food to cross the desert. All that's left is the mountain of rats, and maybe he can pass through it if he goes underground. He's pleased with his idea and decides to give it a try. He's now to the east in the forest. He hit a wolf on the head with a stick. Around him, some wolves are writhing from the blows. Another one tries to attack him by surprise, but he manages to dodge just in time. Opening his screen, he attacks it. He summoned an earth block over it, crushing it. The wolves keep coming and the boar's strength is on cooldown. It was time to use his other abilities. He builds a small tower that places him above the wolves. Delon is quite happy with this distance now. He can't be attacked there but can attack the wolves. The rabbit is upset because Delon is getting stronger and stronger. He descends, boasting, and the wolves are down now. And he tells the rabbit that he's heading for the mountain, and the rabbit can't believe it. He looks at the rabbit suspiciously. Judging by the rabbit's reaction, there must be something about that mountain. The rabbit tries to convince him not to go, but the guy ignores him. The rabbit says that was his home, but the guy says they never liked each other anyway. The rabbit says that without Delon, he will die of loneliness. Seeing footprints on the ground, he imagines he's already close to the mountain. Quickly, he builds a tower with underground access, much to the rabbit's dismay. With the map that appears with the tower, he'll be able to plan his advance carefully. This way, he can get close to the mountain quickly, avoiding dangers. The rats that appeared along the way were properly dealt with, and if he encountered a group too large, he would just go underground. And since the map was essential for his safety, he built several watchtowers. He was almost done building his fourth tower. It's at this moment that a system notification appears. Players cannot leave the territory of the first phase. Delon didn't expect this to happen. The rabbit says that if he goes beyond that point, he'll find out if there's bread in heaven. That was the end of the world. Delon is amazed that the rabbit doesn't get tired, and he asks the rabbit what was beyond that point. Not even the rabbit knows, so he decided to ignore him. Something else catches his attention now. This was apparently more serious. In front of his foot, there was a line of energy, and the color of the ground ahead is different. The rabbit says that this is the territory of the rats, and that he wouldn't be able to pass through there. But he had already crossed it, and the rabbit gets angry. A system screen warns him of this. The rabbit, incredulous, orders him to return. Delon continues walking, ignoring him. The rabbit keeps yelling without success, and the guy taunts him, saying that if he doesn't like it, he should come and get him. The rabbit is furious but can't do anything. Delon observes him impatiently. The rabbit is right at the edge, and the guy teases him, asking if he's unable to cross it. The rabbit is sweating cold with fear, and says that's not it, and that he's not scared. Delon taunts him a bit more, and the rabbit says he doesn't like the color of that place. He was right, the guy can't go there, and this world was divided into phases. It's possible that the reset doesn't work in that area. He wanted to confirm this, and the rabbit decides to run away. The guy would like to ask a few questions, but prefers the rabbit far away anyway. He has 2 weeks until the reset, and will build some towers until then. If nothing resets, his life will become much easier, and he'll be able to reach the other side quickly. If everything goes as he suspects, he'll be able to leave that dungeon forever. He built a tower and is working on the second one. He worked for 3 hours and is now hungry. He's checking what items he has in his inventory. Something on the list caught his attention. There it was, the golem core that he hadn't even noticed he had received. He imagines that with that core, he can make his own golem. He's at the base of the mountain now because he's worried it might attract too many monsters on the surface. The tunnel isn't very tall, so he thinks about making the golem differently. It doesn't need to have a human appearance, and if it's quadrupedal, it will move more easily. He's thinking of making an elephant now. He draws the design on the ground and prepares to create it. He summons some blocks of earth, and with his hands, he begins to shape the golem. The The squirrel gives his hard-working friend a discreet pat, and Dallin pats him back. With the final touch, the golem is finished. Dallin is pleased with what he's made, but as soon as he's done, the sand elephant collapses. He thought the belly gave way due to a lack of structure. He decides to make it slimmer, even if it looks strange. An hour later, it's completed and he's very tired. It now has 2 extra legs and an empty space that can be used to carry things. The spider elephant golem is ready. He climbs onto the golem's back and prepares to implant the core into it. He places it inside its forehead. He gets down from the golem afterward and positions himself in front of it, waiting for any reaction. After some time, nothing happens. Dallin wonders what could have gone wrong. Then the golem's eyes begin to glow intensely. The elephant rises and makes a loud noise. He earned another achievement, Golem Builder. It will follow and obey him. The guy is quite pleased with his golem now, and he thinks about giving it its first order. He commands it to sit like a dog. The golem lowers itself as best it can to obey the command, much to Dallin's delight. Then he climbs up its trunk, and on top of its head, he exclaims how incredible this is. He commands the creature to stand up again. Obeying every command, it's going to be very useful. Now Dallin becomes a little pensive. The squirrel wants to know what that was all about, and the guy says they need to go somewhere. The golem is ready to obey, and Dallin says his golem needs a brother now. The rabbit is in front of the players, wishing them luck in their fight against the boss. They still have doubts about whether they'll be able to return home after this. A strong light blinds them momentarily. They open their eyes to see what's there, and there's nothing, just a mass of destroyed earth. The rabbit can't believe what he's seeing. Then he remembers Dallin. He's furious, and the players ask if they can go home now. The guy flees with his golem. The tunnel he made with his ability leads him from the mountain to the ruins. It took a week of work, but it was worth every drop of sweat. He can't wait to get back to his base. He finally arrives at the Mountain of Death. It took him 2 hours to return, a very reasonable time. He opens his system screen to view the item. He's thinking about what kind of golem to make this time. He's considering making one for combat, a bite with sturdy arms. He already knows what he's going to do. Time passes and the day is breaking. He should have made the elephant this way. It wouldn't have collapsed after being completed. He extends the core to his construction, and he names it the Fierce Gorilla. The gorilla's eyes begin to glow intensely. He shouts with excitement. It worked. He gives it a few commands and tells it to be cautious with the ceiling. Afterward, he introduces one golem to the other. The squirrel is very happy, and Dallin says he's the oldest one here, and he wants to see how strong they both are. Outside the tower, many rats are moving around. Some of them start to notice something happening. A noise is coming from the entrance of the tower. Soon the golems emerge with Dallin. The rats immediately become enraged. They charge at the golems, and Dallin gives a simple order: attack. The gorilla leaps towards the rats. It raises its powerful arms, striking the ground with great force. The rats are stunned, and the rest try to attack, but the gorilla sweeps them away as if they were nothing. And it continues like this, practically unstoppable. The guy watches the strength of the level 1 boss in awe. The gorilla continues pounding the rats with its fists. Instead of decreasing, the rats keep coming in greater numbers, and some of them are already climbing onto the elephant. He orders the elephant to react and prevent the rats from climbing. It begins to stomp the ground violently, but the rats are too many and are starting to surround them. The guy realizes he needs to attack in a different way, and he thinks about attacking on a larger scale. Then he has another epiphany about how to defend himself. He tosses an item to the gorilla. The gorilla grabs a large block of sand in one of its hands. Dallin orders it to throw it. The gorilla prepares to launch the object. It flies far and high into the sky. The block crashes violently on the rats. Dallin is pleased with the result and asks the elephant to move closer to the gorilla. Then the guy climbs onto the other golem. Now he asks the gorilla to extend its hand. This way he can place the cues quickly, and orders the golem to continue attacking the rats. And so it does, using the cues. Each throw crushes several rats. Dallin keeps applying cues to his golem, which hurls them at the rats. Though it's an interesting solution, he had an even better idea. With the elephant close to them, he took advantage of its empty space to fill it with blocks. Now the gorilla's attack was even faster. Quickly, most of the rats had been dealt with. A message appears on his screen, warning that the dungeon is about to reset. Dallin wasn't expecting the dungeon to reset. The ground starts to tremble as soon as the message appears. The rats begin to screech as if something is happening to them. They flee as if they've gone mad, sparking the guy's curiosity because they seem afraid of something. The little squirrel also seems scared of something, and Dallin tries to console his friend. The squirrel tries to tell him something about the approaching danger. He knows that during the last reset, his little friend wasn't scared, but this time it's different. He opens his mini-map to see if he can find anything that might explain this unexpected reaction. At first, there's nothing unusual happening, but the area surrounding the first phase is starting to darken, and the towers there have begun to disappear. Even though everything is vanishing, the area still appears to be safe. However, something in particular catches the guy's attention. Several points appeared around the border. They seem to be monsters. Dallin calls his golems. They need to leave that place now. He orders the elephant to go underground and the gorilla to climb the tower. Now he and the gorilla are up high, observing the surroundings. The earlier tremor was an earthquake, to his relief. That sound was much easier to explain. It was the sound of all the monsters from the first phase moving underground. Dallin can't let this opportunity slip by. This is the perfect chance for him to refine his abilities, and he starts using the boar's strength. After doing so, he also summons some earth cubes and ordered the gorilla to throw the cubes at the monsters. It would be his bazooka. All he had to do was create a block that the gorilla could lift with its ability, and the two of them start hurling the blocks from the top of the tower. A little rat looks up suspiciously. A massive block of earth is descending from the sky toward the monsters. They fall like meteors, and there's nothing the rodents can do to avoid them. The goal wasn't to eliminate the monsters, but to refine Daeun's ability. Because of the ability's cooldown, it wasn't easy to level it up like the digging ability. This time it was different because he could use it for an extended period in a safe place, a golden opportunity. The rats writhe in agony as the boulders rain down on their heads. They gather in one spot, trying to form a living tower. It grows rapidly, reaching towards the tower the boy had built. And you realize what they were doing and that it would be very difficult to hit them now, as it might damage his structure. However, there's no other option but to bring them down. Turning to the little squirrel, he says he's going to nip that problem in the bud, striking the living tower at a critical point. The rats begin to lose their balance and their tower becomes unstable. The rats fall to the ground, defeated by Daeun's stones. Focused on finishing what he started, he concentrates even more, preparing to use his digging ability. He uses it to create a large object in front of him. He'll continue repeating this pattern as long as he can. He prepares his hand to use more of his ability. In front of him now is a block decorated with numerous spikes. He says the gorilla can do its job with that. The beast lifts the spiked block with its immense strength, and using its power, it hurls it toward the monsters below. The spiked cube spins rapidly in the air. Its fall was intense, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. A large trench was created by the impact, clearing the rats that were in the block's path. Daeun is amazed that this idea was so effective. The light discreetly appears in front of him. The system informs him that he has finally mastered the digging ability. He never imagined there would be a level beyond 10, and the boar's strength is now at level 7. From the top of his tower, he concludes that all of this has been very productive. He wants to leave the tower and tells his little squirrel that they're heading back to the base. Night is approaching in this barren land. Now that everything is quiet, he wonders if all the monsters have really left that place. Looking at the map, he guesses they've hidden in the caves. There must be many nests given the number of rats, and the upper part of the map will become dangerous. He knows that it was difficult because they were stationary, and if a large group wanted to attack them, there would be little to be done. However, he is motivated by his results and wants to keep digging. This has become much easier now that he has a master level in this ability. With little effort, he can create enormous tunnels. Using his ability underground, he encountered something unusual. The tunnel met a rock formation different from the usual pattern. The stone was too dense, and no matter what he tried, he couldn't get through it using his digging ability. Without a solution in sight, he decided to return to the surface. The air is a bit chilly. He imagines this is due to the area being open and without trees. Walking in that area would be dangerous with the rats. He needs to think of a path that won't leave him so exposed to the monsters. Even if he can't dig, he could still erect towers, but with the underground blocked, there's little to be done. Especially if he ends up facing another giant horde of rats. Things could get dangerous. He realizes that having more golems might be useful, and now that the dungeon has reset, he can get another one and ask the gorilla to accompany him. He's on the mountain in one of the towers he had built. He's already giving orders to Gorilla number 2, which has just been created. That's his second combat golem. While the gorilla fought against the boss, it was easy to hit the unprotected core, and once he has more golems, he won't even need to interfere in combat. And with his digging ability at the master level, things have become more practical. This way, he can train his bore strength ability, because he's able to produce larger and consequently heavier blocks. With their weight, most monsters won't be a problem at all. However, it's possible that a more dangerous monster exists, so caution is still necessary. Being careful, all he needs to do is plan, especially now that he has 3 golems with him. After a lot of digging, he decided to return to the surface. Once there, he began shivering from the cold almost instantly. The cold was so intense that he even sneezed as if he was already catching a cold. And since he's on the mountain, the altitude makes the place colder than the surroundings. Opening his inventory to search for items, he pulled out the horned boar's hide and used it as a blanket to shield himself from the cold wind. The little squirrel was there with him, bundling up. The coziness was so much that it put his little friend to sleep. The scene was cute enough to bring him joy. After a while, he asked the golems to stop marching, and once they stopped moving, there wasn't as much wind to make him feel cold. Daeun imagines that if he made a roof on the elephant, it could solve his problem with the excessive cold wind, and decided to put his idea into practice. Climbing down, he ordered the gorillas to secure the perimeter. He started handling the clay to shape what he wanted to create. Then he used his digging ability, but something unexpected began to happen in front of him. Making something thin like that was impossible before, but now that he's at a master level in this ability, he managed it. It was not only thin, but also extremely smooth, not even resembling ceramic. Pressing it with his fingertip, the piece broke because it had become too thin, compromising its hardness. Analyzing the piece, he realizes the edges need to be thicker to prevent it from breaking. Even so, he couldn't make a piece that was strong enough. After many attempts, he finally managed to create a result that wasn't excessively thin. Now with the piece thicker, he wonders if it would be a problem if it fell. He spends a few moments deep in thought, imagining what might happen. It was then that his thoughts led him to a conclusion. He should shake the piece as an arched dome. This way it would resist its own weight and provide better protection. Now he was hunched over it, thinking about where he could improve it. With the piece ready, he asked one of the gorillas to carefully place the object on the elephant. Now the elephant had a well-crafted roof capable of protecting its occupants from the elements. Dallin lies down on it calmly, pleased with what he had accomplished. The little squirrel appears and says something to him now. The guy thinks he can better use his skills and perhaps build a wall to prevent monsters from passing. Now that he can't hide underground, raising a wall would protect them during surface travels. Since it was very cold, he thought of first making an insulating wall. And now that digging was at its maximum level, he could create even more elaborate things. He could replicate things he had in his life in Korea. And after much work, he created something that hadn't existed in that dungeon until then. A campfire similar to an oven had been built. The elephant golem now had a chimney and could produce heat. There was a space for burning wood, a bathroom, a storage area, and a well-designed steam passage through the golem's trunk. The work was so well executed that the little squirrel was extremely impressed by it. Another achievement was unlocked for creating a heating system, and the heat manipulation skill was added to the craftsman skill. He hadn't expected a reward for that, and he wasn't even surprised. 2 long months pass, and they were now in the historical ruins. The rabbit is incredulous at what he observes. Once again, the golem had been destroyed, and the players want to know what to do now. This is definitely not good. Dallin continues to collect the item from the level 1 boss. If things keep going this way, his superiors will start to complain. At his base, the guy just laments a little that he can't show what he's made to anyone else. If the rabbit were there, he would show him his entire army of golems, which now numbers 5. The group of golems advances up the mountain. The guy is inside the mobile home that his elephant has become. Through the window, he doesn't see any rats and assumes it's because they're now high up on the mountain. If they continue at this pace and without any unforeseen events, they'll soon reach the top. He finally dismounted from his elephant, and contemplating the horizon line, he was quite impressed with what he could see from there. The mountain range formed a beautiful landscape as seen from that spot. Perhaps that's why people enjoy hiking. The scenery is not only beautiful, but also takes you to places with refreshing air. He looks back for a moment, and something immediately catches his attention. In the distance, it's possible to see a fort, and he doesn't know why that structure is there. Now he's wondering what that could be. As he gets closer, his doubts only grow about why the historical ruins are in that place. He was far from the location of the first phase, and now he wants to know why it's called a historical ruin. Since it's the rabbit who calls it that, he doesn't know the reason but assumes it must have been built a long time ago. He wonders if it existed in that world before it became a giant dungeon. And if he stays there in front of it, he won't discover anything, so he decided to enter to investigate. And since he has 5 golems with him now, he doesn't need to worry as much. He climbs the stairs and looks at the gargoyle beside him. He hadn't seen that before and wonders what that statue is. The statue appears to be very well made with rich details. It was crafted from raw stone. However, the color was a bit strange. Even so, it's clear that it was very well made. He continues climbing the stairs, passing by the statue. As he ascends, the statue suddenly moves. A large explosion occurs and pieces of stone fly in all directions. The guy falls backward, worried because he doesn't know what just happened. The statue is now in front of him, holding a large trident in its hands and in a threatening posture. Dallin can't hide the panic on his face. The statue is enormous, and the flapping of its wings stirs up the dust in the area. It leaps into the sky, causing a strong gust of wind. The guy has no idea why it's alive. The gargoyle is high above, ready to attack anyone below. Dallin thinks he's in big trouble because there's little he can do against such a huge beast. The gargoyle swoops down fiercely towards the intruder of the ruin. Dallin desperately calls for his golems to do something. Before the gargoyle could reach him, 2 of the gorillas were already prepared to attack the aggressor. The statue strikes the first one of the blow from its trident. The blow is powerful enough to cause one of the gorilla's arms to snap like rotten wood. The gargoyle then turns to the other golem to try to attack it. Noticing more golems coming to attack, it leaps into the air again, avoiding being grabbed by them. Now it descends towards the ones that had collided with each other. And with a swing of its powerful tail, another of the golems is damaged. The gargoyle lands on the ground while the gorilla succumbs to the damage it has taken. It stands tall with no damage to its body. Dallin is genuinely worried because this statue is much stronger than he expected. However, the golems, despite suffering extensive damage to their bodies, are already beginning to regenerate. Dallin realizes he needs to distract the creature to give the golems a chance to attack. He summons an earth cube, placing it on his elephant's trunk. He then orders the elephant to hurl the cube toward the statue. The boulder is launched with great force. The gargoyle notices the cube flying towards it and shields itself with one of its wings, blocking the attack. The dust from the cube begins to settle, revealing the condition of the statue's wing. Despite the impact, it hadn't suffered any damage. Dallin realizes that the strength of the earth he's throwing is nothing compared to the resistance of the stones the gargoyle is made of. and that's all he can do right now, nothing more. Thinking quickly, he uses his abilities once again. The elephant shoots another massive earth cube at the statue. Once again, the statue defends itself with one of its wings. He then orders his gorillas to attack the creature. The statue is grabbed by them, becoming immobilized. The stone dragon begins to writhe, and by spinning rapidly, it manages to break free from the gorilla's grasp, sending them flying. Dalvin had hoped the gorillas would be able to hold it off for a bit, but at this rate, they'll turn to dust and he doesn't know what to do. The guy hears a faint voice. One of the gorillas stands up resolutely. He doesn't understand at first what is happening. The gorilla roars fiercely at the statue. It manages to grab it from behind, successfully immobilizing it. Dalvin observes the cleverness of the fourth gorilla. Seeing what was happening in front of him, he orders the remaining golems to flee the area. They manage to escape while the last gorilla holds the gargoyle in place. This was far from ideal. The situation was nearly catastrophic. They're now close to the summit of the northern mountain, and the gargoyle hasn't followed them there. It's a miracle that he got out of there losing only one of his golems, and now he can only wonder what might be in that ruin. According to the map, that wasn't a monster, and since it's not in the phase area, it's not a boss either. He hadn't expected this to be in his path. That must be why the rats don't go there. There's definitely something behind all of this. Now Dalvin needs to find out what it is, no matter what. Another month has passed in that place, and he remains on the Mountain of Death. Amidst the land of rocks and various boulders, the guy works tirelessly. But no matter how hard he tries, it seems impossible to make any progress. He's already frustrated because that stone is impossible to mine. The guy tries to calm down because he knows he can't lose his sanity in this place. A bit calmer, he looks at the ground. He observes the tool he was using to try to mine this stone as he's planning his revenge against the gargoyle. And to understand the preparations he's been making, it's necessary to go back to the beginning, about a month ago. He was in the forest and found what seemed to be a large hammer. Someone might have abandoned that item there, a metal hammer, and he had only returned to that place to make more golems. What he learned from the battle is that earth golems are ineffective against beasts made of stone. He needed something that was tougher than stone since his golems couldn't do it. And after thinking a lot about the subject, he decided to create weapons that the golems could use. Finding the hammer ended up being a fortunate discovery in that land. The mountain peaks decorate the horizon line. The hammer was too small for the golems to use as a weapon, but he had found a material that could be shaped into one. He opened his inventory to use some of the items he had. The hammer was more of a tool than a defensive weapon. Dalvin's skill tree was entirely focused on creating objects and things. After working hard, he wondered if it would be good enough. He asked his little squirrel if making an axe was a good idea. What he managed to achieve was the recovery of the golem lost in the battle against the gargoyle. He had no experience with stone and spent an entire month working with this material, refining his skills. The work was exhausting, and even though he had made 5 axes, he was very tired of having to mine the stone. He wielded the hammer, but the progress in shaping the stone was slow and tedious. Even so, he kept working day after day. Striking the stone once more, a glow erupted in front of him. Another achievement was unlocked due to his efforts. Now he had the stone carving ability. It was yet another thing he didn't expect to happen. The dungeon provided all kinds of skills, and that's how he acquired the digging ability after digging extensively. Now he just needed to figure out how to use this newly acquired skill. He imagined he needed to punch the stone, but doing so didn't achieve anything. So he grabbed the hammer in his hands and thought of using it to see if something different would happen. He spoke the name of the skill as he prepared to strike the boulder. A bluish glow emanated from the spot where the impact occurred. He observed the stone he was trying to break intently. After some time, it cracked. He didn't need to hit very hard, and yet the cut was clean. Remembering the effort he had put in all those days trying to shape the stones, he recognized the value of this skill. He struck a few more stones to improve his affinity with the skill, continuing to understand how it worked. Looking at a larger stone, he wondered if he could break that one too. Now he was determined to try. The sound of the strike echoed through the place. The single blow wasn't enough, but he imagined that with more strikes, he could break it. Now he was thinking of making the axes with the help of this skill. It was much easier, and it took him only an hour to carve the axe. And now the time required to make them was much shorter. In total, he managed to make the 8 axes he wanted, and with the different shapes, he learned more about the characteristics of the material. He needed to strike with something harder than the stone. The heavier the tool, the easier the stone broke. He could also control the direction in which the stone would break. He wondered what would happen if he struck without the guide. Even though it would break, the impact would have no direction, and it would be slower and less efficient, just scattering unusable pieces on the ground. However, one of these pieces caught his attention. He decided to hit it with a hammer, and saw that there were even smaller pieces. He wanted to see how far he could break them down. He repeatedly struck the small pieces of stone. The stone had turned to powder, resembling more sand than stone, and in this state, he thought of testing his digging ability on it. Extending his hand towards the stone powder, he used his ability. A block began to form in front of him. He was impressed by what was happening before his eyes, and looking at his inventory, he realized that it had worked. The material of the brick was the same as the stone, so it was very hard, almost as if it had turned back into stone. He needed to break more stones to make more bricks like that. He couldn't stop thinking about how this skill would be once it reached the maximum level. With a stick, he began drawing on the ground. He was planning his strategy against the gargoyle, which had the advantage in open spaces due to its ability to fly. Using the stone carving skill on it could be dangerous, so the boy kept thinking he just needed a way to get close without putting himself at risk. He needed to dig a tunnel, and with the stone carving skill, he might be able to. But it was possible that at his current skill level, the time required would be impractical. He continued trying to think of a solution, and looked at the drawing of his golems on the ground. And finally, it seemed he had an interesting idea. The first golem was the elephant, but he made a gorilla right after, and he needed mobility to fight. What could help him now was a more agile golem. He began sketching shapes on the ground that could fulfill this objective. The little squirrel was impressed by the drawing. Daon looks at his friend, wanting to say something. The boy tells his little buddy that they need to create his new siblings. The squirrel is very happy to see the family growing. At the entrance to the ruins, the gargoyle stands guard. It remains still but alert to its surroundings. It begins to move slowly as his eyes light up. Its hand grips the trident tightly. The boy is there for his revenge. And the gargoyle senses that there's an intruder. Golems are approaching, and they have the shape of centaurs. The form Daon chose to achieve the agility he needed was that of centaurs. They advance in formation. Behind them is Daon, riding on a clay ostrich. With his idea, he managed to create an entire cavalry. The bonus for having the digging skill at the maximum level allowed him to shape the earth with little effort. The older golems are intact. They just don't have their cores. The gargoyle takes to the air, preparing to attack those who are trying to enter the ruin. The boy says the lizard can cry all at once, and the first stone hits the flying gargoyle. It defends itself from the attack, but this time its wing cracks from the impact of the stone. Daon notices something even more interesting. The wing remains cracked, a clear sign that it isn't regenerating. Perhaps it doesn't have a core, making it less dangerous, so he orders the centaurs to attack the beast. They advance, carrying the stones carved by the boy. The gargoyle descends to attack, heading toward the laid centaur. With its trident, it cuts through the centaur effectively. A second centaur tries to strike with the stone it's carrying, and the edge of its axe hits the shaft of the trident, breaking it. Even so, the gargoyle uses the broken weapon to slice through the centaur in front of it. The boy ordered the two that had attacked to fall back so that two others could take the lead in the assault. In this way, attacking in pairs, he could give his golems time to regenerate, and with more precise commands, they could react better. This was only possible because he was issuing orders very quickly. No matter how strong the gargoyle was, it wouldn't withstand infinite attacks, and one of its weaknesses finally became apparent. It was now closer to the ground. Its feet were almost touching the soil, and Daon ordered his golems to grab the gargoyle's legs. It tried to take off again, but the golems were pulling it down. The boy advances toward the battle, mounted on his ostrich, and he remembers his friend's advice about the size of monsters. Because the bigger they are, the harder they fall. He remembers this saying and is focused on the statue's defeat. Closer to the battle, he created a staircase with blocks of earth. Getting closer, he reinforced the command to pull it down with more force. After some struggle, the gargoyle was thrown to the ground. While it's held down by the centaurs, Daon leaps toward the gargoyle. He opens his inventory while still in the air, and attacks it by releasing several blocks he was carrying. The gargoyle is being buried by the stone blocks. The impact is violent, and the golems ensure it doesn't escape during the process. The gargoyle tries to move, but the successive impacts make it difficult. It attempts to flee once the stone blocks have fallen. But the boy now summons his earthen bricks, and more blocks fall on the gargoyle's head. Daon notices that the gargoyle is breaking the blocks with its mouth before they can hit it. There aren't many options left, so he opens his inventory once more and hurls the bricks he had made toward it. The gargoyle tries to react, but it's futile. In its mouth is a stone block, and above it is Daon, wielding his ore mining hammer. The gargoyle is finally subdued with almost nothing left to do. Even so, the centaurs continue to immobilize it. The little squirrel celebrates from atop the ostrich. The boy prepares to strike the statue using his rock-breaking skill, and he hits it in the jaw while activating this sculpting ability. The impact point of the hammer begins to produce numerous cracks. The gargoyle implodes on itself. As the dust settles a bit more, the little squirrel tries to see what happened. The gargoyle's hand tries to rise, agonizing, but it soon stops moving. The squirrel celebrates the victory even more. The stone sculpting ability leveled up several times. After that battle, it reached level 4. Looking at the shattered statue beneath his feet, Daon celebrates, knowing his team had succeeded. Meanwhile, the rabbit is terrified by what's been happening. A monkey in a suit approaches him for a conversation. The mandrill asks how the rabbit has been spending his days. He is the guide for Phase 2, and the rabbit wants to know what he's doing there. The hierarchy of guides is based on the number of dungeons they control. The more dungeons one controls, the more respected they are. The mandrill is responsible for 2 dungeons, so he outranks the rabbit. And unlike the rabbit, the mandrill has a name. The rabbit asks what the mandrill is doing there, and the mandrill retorts, asking if the rabbit has been doing his job in the past few days. The The rabbit says yes, but doesn't understand why the mandrill is upset. The mandrill asks again if the rabbit is sure about that, and once more, the rabbit confirms. The mandrill says the number of survivors reaching his phase has doubled and wants to know why the rabbit's performance has dropped so much. The rabbit promises to work harder, but blames it all on the Bolgado who keeps killing the level 1 boss. The mandrill seems to be running out of patience. He suggests the rabbit stop lying to him. Dalan decides that he might need those bricks later, so he stores them away again. Noticing that his stone sculpting ability is now at level 4, he assumes it's because the gargoyle was so strong. It would make sense since that battle wasn't easy. It wouldn't have been great if the gargoyle had a core, but if it did, he might not have defeated it. Even so, he decides to carve the body to save bricks. Now he's even more convinced that the gargoyle didn't have a core, but thanks to it, he managed to level up. Looking at the ruins, he remembers the rabbit saying that this was the end of the world. He wants to enter and see what secrets lie within and wonders if he'll encounter others like that along the way. Patiently staring at the entrance to the ruins, he makes up his mind. He finally decides to enter with his golems. He called out to golem number 3, who was lagging behind. After a short march, he was impressed by something he saw. The rabbit tries to evade, saying he's an honest rabbit and wouldn't lie. The mandrill keeps laughing but says he's already figured everything out. He's talking about the exile who defied fate, Dalan. The rabbit is in trouble and the worst possible person has discovered it. Dalan is trying to purify the place with his ability. He noticed that the place doesn't reset at all, and he can't explain why there are so many bones in that corridor. There are many carcasses, and he's starting to get a bit worried. One of the centaurs steps on a plate in the floor that sinks. This triggers a barrage of arrows that hit it in the head. He didn't expect to find traps there, but he's glad he sent one of the golems ahead. The golem looks at him, riddled with arrows, which is a bit bizarre. Even so, the golems aren't hurt because they regenerate. Seeing this, Dalan praises their work. Then he orders them to break the walls so he doesn't have to worry about hidden arrows. An arrow falls to the ground, nearly broken. The boy praises his golems and suggests they take a break now. With them stopped, he begins to remove the arrows one by one. He finally removed the last arrow. The golem starts celebrating while he examines the arrows he removed. They are so old that they're falling apart. In the other traps, instead of liquid oil, solid oil fell, and some magic circles couldn't activate due to excessive mold. The boy wonders how many years that place has been abandoned. The squirrel is pacing in circles, passing the time. It suddenly stops and Dalan asks his little friend if something happened. The squirrel runs off and the boy follows. Seeing to enter a small hole, he says that's a dead end. He then orders the golems to tear down the wall in front of him. They strike it together with devastating force. The power is so great that the boy thinks the heavens are on his side, and soon, his eyes widen. The squirrel points to something. There's an enormous gate and he wonders if it's a hall where the boss is hiding. Running his hands over the gate, he senses that the boss there has already been defeated. Even so, he decides to use the boar's strength at that moment. He looks through a crack calmly, but soon his whole face is illuminated by what he sees. In front of him is a massive dragon skeleton. The little squirrel is in love with all those bones, but the boy holds it back, realizing the squirrel has a strong interest in bones. Not knowing what could happen, he orders his golems to enter as well and stay with him. Dalan told the little squirrel to be quieter because, in the worst-case scenario, they might have to flee. As he approached the dragon bones, he remarked that they were much more interesting when seen up close. He continued to hold back the excited squirrel. There was an interesting box nearby, but it seemed like a complicated night. Something was written in Hebrew on its lid, which caught the boy's attention. He looked once more at the table, and a strong light overwhelmed his vision. The brightness caused him to fall to the ground, and he wondered if it was a trap. The light became increasingly complex, and the symbols began organizing themselves in the air. The boy watched it all unfold before him, unable to understand. The letters were now in a language he could comprehend, and they were calling him the Chosen One. Assuming it was addressing him, the screen confirmed it was indeed speaking to him. The boy stood up, startled, and asked who was speaking. The screen responded that it was the ruler of that place and that the hall he was in belonged to it. The boy asked if this being was the dragon whose bones were there. The screen confirmed, stating that the dragon was merely hibernating. The boy joked, saying it looked more like the dragon was in eternal sleep. The screen explained that this didn't apply to dragons and that after a battle, its life force was depleted, but to the boy, that just sounded like a fancy way of saying the dragon was dead. The boy felt pity for the entity speaking to him, assuming it hadn't accepted the passing of its master. But the screen insisted that the dragon hadn't departed. Changing the subject, the boy asked why the screen was so serious, sensing that it had a short temper. The screen then explained that the resurrection of the dragon was the reason the temple existed, and the boy asked why this hadn't been done yet. The screen revealed that the dragon's life force was at its limit. The boy joked that it's always the same, and the screen mentioned he was lucky to be the chosen one. Shifting topics again, the boy asked why the screen said he had what was necessary. The screen explained that it was because he had passed all the tests set by the dragon. He was qualified to meet Lord Earthia. The boy tried to recall when he had passed those tests. The screen asked if he had already forgotten the challenges he faced to get there. Now he could associate the difficulties he had encountered. The screen congratulated him for accomplishing all this, and the boy thought he might receive something in return. His eyes sparkled with anticipation. The screen then said he would inherit the temple, which made him happy. But he quickly asked the screen to repeat what it just said. He wanted to know what benefits came with assuming the temple. The screen said he would receive eternal happiness, and the boy turned away, saying he didn't need that. The screen mentioned that it would soon perish, and the boy assumed it was trying to make him feel sorry. The screen explained that only its soul remained, and it was ignoring its own departure. The boy scratched his head, deep in thought. He said he was sorry about that, but didn't want to stay there, as he had other things to do, even if it didn't seem like it. The screen asked what was wrong with him, insisting that he was refusing an honored position, and he replied that he wanted to find his comrades in that place. He was surprised by his own words, not realizing that this was his true goal. Then he said he wanted to go home. The screen asked if that was really what he wanted. Despite everything he had been through, he had been ignoring in his heart that what he truly desired was to return to his world. The screen said that if he wished for that, he should assume the temple, as he would be able to use the dragon's authority. The boy, now interested, asked what that was. The screen explained that this ability granted the power to open portals. He lay on the ground, saying that all of this was very amusing. He looked at the screen and contemplated his title as Master of the Historical Ruins. He was now organizing his thoughts, realizing the unexpected title he had gained. He wondered if he could open a portal to his world. The screen informed him that there were no limits to the portals. But opening portals consumed life energy, and the farther the destination, the more energy was required. And the way this happened was through an offering. Both living creatures and inanimate objects possessed life energy, and the boy realized that the object before him was an altar. Picking up a piece of food, he asked if it would work. The screen instructed him to place it on the altar. As soon as the food is placed on the altar, it is immediately consumed. The screen remarks that the offering was exceptional, but the boy wants to know if he can open a portal now. The screen explains that while the offering was good, one piece of meat is insufficient to open a portal, so he places much more meat on the altar. The screen, surprised by his ability to use spatial magic, asks for permission to analyze the boy. He agrees, and after a quick analysis, the screen states that it understands now. The screen, now displaying some information, reveals that he is a being who has already been offered as a sacrifice. The status window is a mark left by the death dragon on its offerings. The boy is shocked by this information. His status window has changed, and he hopes he is no longer an offering. He begins to think that his friends might also be offerings, like him. He became the master of the ruin because the screen said it would erase the mark of the offering, but he still wants to know if he can use the portals. Noticing his new abilities, he realizes they are quite powerful. He calls out to the screen, now known as Alpha. He asks if he can enhance his new abilities using vital energy, to which Alpha replies that he can. He is determined to use everything at his disposal to achieve his goals. He plans to offer more sacrifices than the system can handle. Alpha asks if it can make a request, and the boy wants to know what it is. Alpha asks him to restrain the little squirrel that is gnawing on the dragon's bones, and the boy is surprised, not even realizing when the squirrel got there. Meanwhile, the mandrill is still intimidating the rabbit. The rabbit can't believe he's being demoted. The mandrill says the rabbit allowed an offering to the death dragon to escape, which made him fail as a guide. The mandrill came there specifically to strip the rabbit of his powers, but the rabbit knows that the mandrill had wanted to get rid of him for a long time and finally found a pretext. The mandrill repeats that he is now in charge of that area. The rabbit asks where he should go now. The mandrill says that's not his problem and that the rabbit isn't square, so he'll manage. He orders the rabbit to hunt down the survivor and bring him to the mandrill. The rabbit wants to know what will be done with the boy. The mandrill says he needs to be taken down, and that this is the rabbit's final mission. Now the rabbit realizes the truth. The mandrill wants to eliminate him. The boy tells Alpha he has one last question before he leaves. He asks if Alpha knows that he wants to go home, and Alpha confirms this. The boy wants to know if he'll be able to leave peacefully once he's prepared everything, and Alpha says yes, as long as he finds a replacement. He asks if he can go out to find a successor since there's no one there. It's just an excuse. He wants to go back, but he doesn't want to abandon his friends. The next day, in the Mountains of Death, someone is wandering aimlessly. It's the rabbit, searching for the human. He's frustrated, unable to believe the boy has gone so far. Seeing several towers, he assumes this is the path the boy took. Meanwhile, more meat is placed on the altar. Alpha consumes the offering to produce vital energy. The boy asks if it's possible to use the vital energy from all the offerings, and Alpha confirms that it is. He wants to use the first ability he gained in the temple, opening portals. Placing his hands on the ground, he manages to create a portal in front of him. Now he observes it, curious to know where it will lead. Alpha explains that in its current state, the portal leads nowhere, as 2 portals need to be created. The boy finds this illogical since he can't create a portal in Korea. Alpha explains that his ability is still restricted by its level, and that when he perfects it, he'll be able to go wherever he desires. Alpha adds that if he continues progressing at this rate, he'll master the ability in 20 years. Eager to test the ability, the boy summons another portal next to the first. Now they're connected, Alpha says. Alpha explains that if he enters one, he'll come out the other, and the boy is excited to test this. And that's exactly what happens. but his little squirrel didn't go with him. Even though the squirrel tries to force its way in, it cannot enter the portal. Alpha explains that only with the master's permission can other beings pass through the portals, so Delon gives permission for the little squirrel. As soon as he says this, the squirrel is able to pass through and begins to playfully jump in and out of the portals. Dalan then asks if his golems can do the same, and Alpha confirms that they can, though will consume a bit of mana. Dalan finds this very cool and already imagines summoning his golems anywhere. Alpha agrees that it's a good idea, but suggests that if Dalan is ever endangered, it would be better for him to use the portal himself. Dalan stretches and says he's going outside because it's too stuffy inside. Outside the ruin, he celebrates. Looking at one of the peaks, he imagines there must be something behind it. He moves closer for a better look. Peering down, he is soon impressed by what he sees. It's a vast sea of clouds, and Alpha asks if he finds it beautiful. The boy replies that he does. He asks Alpha if it knows what's beneath the clouds, but Alpha says it doesn't care about anything outside the temple. The boy comments that normal people might have a problem with loneliness, but he's used to it. Curiosity is natural, and he decides to create an observatory there. Soon, his tower is built. With it, he can get a sense of the surroundings using his mini-map. The map reveals that they are surrounded by trees. He thought that this was the end of the world, but it seems they are surrounded by plains, and Alpha asks if he plans to descend the mountain. Alpha is concerned about losing the temple's ruler, but the boy says he's come this far and wants to explore. Alpha asks why he wants to descend the mountain, but the boy is distracted, deep in thought. He pulls out his hammer from his inventory. He asks if it's sufficient, and Alpha, curious, asks what he's doing. The boy replies that he's going to make stairs. He begins to carve the ground, and Alpha asks how he plans to create the stairs. Dalan explains that his stone sculpting ability helps him control the direction in which the rock breaks. Alpha comments that it still doesn't look like a staircase, but Dalan asks Alpha to just watch. He extends his hand over the markings he made. Then he gives a command to carve, and the ground begins to change. Much to Alpha's surprise, it worked perfectly. Descending the mountain is now possible. It will just take some time, and Dalan will be able to perfect his technique in the process. He's excited and can't wait to achieve it. Elsewhere, a small group of players is making their way through the forest. One woman wonders where they are at that moment. She doesn't say it out loud, but she's very scared. Someone comments that they've come quite far. He wonders what kind of monsters they might encounter now that they've passed the phase. But they've already defeated many enemies, and in the process, they've become stronger. So even if problems arise, they'll manage. Wherever they are, they will survive. He has an iron will that keeps his determination unwavering. His words end up motivating his companions. They calm down amidst the uncertainty of that place. One woman asks if they should plant potatoes there, and he agrees. Looking in another direction, Sunwoo becomes a bit pensive. The mountain on the horizon seems familiar to him, like he's seen it before. A system screen appears in front of him. It congratulates him for reaching Phase 4. Meanwhile, on the mountain, something else is happening. Dalan is quite tired and wants to rest for a bit now. He has made a large staircase and comments that it's different from digging on flat ground. He's ascended a lot, and it would be exhausting to go up and down all the time. He begins to work on the slope, and Alpha asks if this is an alternate path. But the boy says he's placing a portal there, and Alpha praises his ingenuity. However, the boy forgets that he needs vital energy and is out of offerings. Alpha explains that he's connected to the altar and can make an offering from wherever he is. Alpha tells him that all he needs to do is eat, and once he's satisfied, whatever exceeds that will go to the altar. Dalan is pleased to learn this and starts eating. Since he just needs to eat a lot, he won't complain. After eating a bit, he tries to create the portal. Meanwhile, the rabbit is trudging along the mountain slope. He's completely hopeless, not expecting anything to happen. He's also feeling very hungry. The rabbit had climbed too far up the mountain. He was frustrated because he hated climbing. He was hungry, cold, and tired and couldn't remember the last time he got paid. His payment was to take down a player, which transferred their vital energy to him. He was upset, blaming everything on the human. He spotted a rat in front of him. The rat squeaked threateningly. The rabbit was startled, not realizing the rat could see him. But the rat walked on normally, unable to see the rabbit after all. He could resist for now, but if he continued to weaken, the rats could become a real threat. The more he walked, the more his life force dwindled. The rabbit collapsed on the ground, exhausted. He was so tired that he lost his ability to fly. He tried to pull himself together as best he could, but a few rats began to gather around him. At that moment, it dawned on the rabbit. If he slipped up, he would lose much more than just a few abilities. He fled from the swarm of rats that inhabited the mountain. Terrified, he shouted for them not to follow him. He knew he needed to find shelter or risk dying. Ahead of him stood a tower, and he thought of hiding inside it. The rabbit quickly entered the shelter. Once inside, he tried to catch his breath. He looked up and saw a point of light. He began to climb the stairs to escape the rats that were still pursuing him. The rabbit was frustrated that the human built such tall towers. He was now very close to the top of the stairs. Finally, he reached the top of the tower. He looked back, frightened because the entrance had no door. The rats leaped at him aggressively. He said that even though he seemed weak, he could still defend himself. And he started punching the monsters. After all, he was the guide of the first phase. His plan was to lure the rats into the narrow passage and knock them out with his punches. The strategy worked, giving him the advantage. And even without his guide powers, he managed to handle the situation with just his fists. What he didn't expect was that the effort would be too much. His health was at its limit, and he was worried that he might end up being taken down. The rats kept coming, and just like him, they were starving. The rats charged at him, desperate and furious. The rabbit realized this was a battle of the famished, so he decided to make a final leap with the strength he had left. The rabbit threw himself out of the tower, with the rats following him. In a final gesture, he told the rats to try eating him. As he fell, he thought it was better to do this than to experience being eaten alive. Accumulating hatred for the mandrill, the rabbit cursed him in his final moments. Like the mandrill, he also cursed the bub human who was directly responsible for everything that had happened to him. But instead of crashing to the ground, the rabbit landed in Daeon's arms as he was passing by. Daeon had come to see why there were so many rats moving around. Now he wanted to know what the rabbit was doing there. The rabbit was terrified because he hadn't expected to run into the human at that moment. But being so weak, he began to lose consciousness. Sometime later, he started to smell something very pleasant. He woke up startled and jumped to his feet. The rabbit was inside the dragon's temple. In front of him was a plate of potatoes. The smell was too inviting and he rushed toward the potatoes, intending to eat them. But someone stopped him and said he couldn't eat yet. The human told him that he had worked very hard to make those potatoes. Now the rabbit realized he wasn't dreaming. However, he didn't care about anything anymore and begged the human for some of the potatoes. He pleaded desperately, saying he was starving. Daeon asked if he really wanted some of the potatoes. The rabbit nodded vigorously. Daeon then made him an offer to become his successor in the temple. The rabbit was caught off guard by that proposal. He still hadn't understood what it meant to be a successor or exactly what it entailed. He said that he became the master of that place by chance, and that he would like the rabbit to succeed him since he has experience in administration. Offering the potatoes once again, he asked if the rabbit would like to eat and if rabbits eat potatoes. The rabbit took them from the boy's hand and said that they don't eat them because there aren't any. The rabbit is eating voraciously and even the boy is wondering if they are that good. He is satisfied and Daeon asks if there's any problem with eating something cultivated in the dungeon, but the rabbit said that he was demoted and doesn't care anymore. Now the boy wants to know why he had been demoted. He didn't expect to hear that. And after some time and a bit of reluctance, the rabbit explained everything to him. The boy is now fully aware of everything and understood that the mandrill is planning to overthrow the rabbit. He wants to know if the rabbit went there to deliver him to the mandrill and if he could have told what he said. But the rabbit, determined, said that he won't change his mind anymore. His situation was already bad and there's not much to be done now. Now he wants to know more about this thing of becoming a successor. One door closed, but another is opening now. And resolutely, he says that his dedication is now entirely to Dawn. Alpha was listening to everything and asked if he could interfere now. The rabbit started sweating cold as soon as he heard the voice because he knew it was Earthly the dragon and he had no idea that he was in his temple. Alpha asked them to go to the altar and the rabbit was hesitant, fearing he might become a sacrifice, but the boy assured him that it wasn't about that. The rabbit asked if he had managed to open that door and Dawn said that he would be surprised much more. In opening the door, he said the rabbit would probably go crazy. The sight was really too much for the rabbit, who couldn't hide his emotions. On the ground, there was a small sprout developing, and Daeon introduced him to his potato plantation that covered the entire floor of the hall. The rabbit couldn't believe that Daeon had turned the secret room into a plantation where Earthia's skeleton was. And the boy said that to survive, food was necessary, so he couldn't waste such a useful space. And he said that the dragon must have liked the plantation, and both the rabbit and Alpha said in unison that no, he probably didn't like it. Alpha said he was almost crying for having someone else with common sense there, and Daeon couldn't see anything wrong with his conduct. The rabbit asked if he had survived all this time like that, and he said that first, he made some stairs. Then he started taking care of his small garden, and occasionally he used some rats as sacrifices. And after some time, he ended up finding the rabbit again, who couldn't believe this story. He wanted to know how he managed to deal with the rats. He then called his golems. They presented themselves and the boy asked if they weren't cool, but the rabbit finally understood why there are no more bosses on level 1. That human is simply out of his mind. And the rabbit is fascinated by this madness while he's just trying to adapt to the new environment. Alpha said that if they were done, the rabbit should climb onto the altar, and the temple master should place his hand on him. He did as told, and a circle appeared on his hand. A new ability emerged, the ability to designate an administrator. Alpha said that the requirements were met, and Daeon didn't even know he could still have new abilities. Alpha said that his devotion was too little to tell him everything, and Daeon asked if he was talking about offerings. He thinks he needs to try everything, and the rabbit asks what is going on. Daeon doesn't know if it's luck or bad luck, but he didn't expect to get so involved with that sadistic rabbit. Extending his hand once more, the circle reverberated in his hand. He designated the rabbit as an administrator, and his clothes started to shine, as did the power that was renewed in him. After shining brightly, his clothes returned to their normal color. He had become an intermediate administrator, but didn't have a name yet. He couldn't believe he had gone from being a guide to becoming an intermediate administrator. Alpha said that the rabbit's previous experience helped him, and he celebrated by saying that the flat earth had turned over. Dalan didn't expect the rabbit to be so happy about that. He called him master and said that all his loyalty was his, and that he wanted them to forget the past, and Dalan just asked him not to be over the top. But he remembered that they had been through a lot at the beginning, and he ordered the rabbit to kneel, who didn't understand. It finally hit him. The rabbit had gained a new master along with his new title. Dalan ordered him to look down now. The rabbit received his first command. He is in the garden planting potatoes, a whole bunch of them. The rabbit is already exhausted from so much work. He asks if he really has to do that, and the boy says he needs to pay for his sins. The rabbit realized he had become a slave and needs to urgently think of something to change this situation. Screams echo through the forest at the beginning. A frightened boy tries to defend himself from an enraged boar. He tries to fight back, but even with the sword in his hands, his efforts were useless. Mandrill observes from above that the new participants perish very quickly. He feels something different happening. He lost his connection with the rabbit, and he starts thinking about what could have happened to him. In a pot, there are some cooked potatoes, and Dalan calls his administrator to have a snack with him. He doesn't understand that the potatoes are those because in the pot, he only sees plant roots. The rabbit says that the floor of the room is warm, and Dalan responds that he did that so he could plant. The rabbit asks if the little squirrel disappeared, and Dalan says it's in the room too. He has his mouth full, and the rabbit wants to know what he ate. Dalan said that the squirrel likes to eat bones. The rabbit asks why the squirrel climbed onto the golem, and Dalan told him not to do that. With his tiny hands, he made a hole in the golem. Once the hole was open, he was ready, and he opened his mouth, dropping the bones inside. As soon as he did that, he quickly closed the hole and hid his bones. Dalan said it must be a habit of storing food, but he wished the little squirrel would stop doing that. With him in his hands, he started noticing something. He had a task for the rabbit, who said he had just started resting, but he ordered him to get up anyway. The rabbit is very annoyed because careful and hardworking bosses are the most annoying. The rabbit is now carrying the bones from that place. He wants to know why he's carrying those bones, and Dalan already knows what to do, so he called everyone there. He ordered the golems to crush the bones, and the rabbit was afraid of their strength. Once that was done, Dalan used his purification ability, and he told the rabbit to spread the bone dust over the field, and he asked why he should do that. He said that they are fertilizers, and the rabbit was thinking that he was crazy, but now he understood and even found it genius. Despite working hard in that place, the rabbit had his moments of joy, like the meals, and there was one dish he liked more than the others. Wild boar barbecue. It was simply fabulous. And with excitement, he takes each piece of meat to his mouth. He feels like he is being transported to paradise with every bite of meat he consumes. Outside the ancient ruins, something is happening. The mandrill is perplexed by what he is seeing. The boss was no longer there, only his remains. The core was already in Dalan's hands, and farming golems is another thing the rabbit loved. He asked why the rabbit was smiling, and he said he's sure the mandrill must be going crazy right now, and he knows exactly how he must be feeling. He didn't expect there to be a tunnel there. That is why he couldn't find Dalan, who asked why he seemed offended, and the rabbit changed the subject. He suggested placing a portal there so they wouldn't always have to walk, and Dalan praised the idea. The portal was immediately created, and soon they were home. Alpha warned that he was wasting vital energy, but Dalan said that it was an investment, and now that he was there, he had something else to think about and do. The potatoes had grown too much, and the rabbit says they eat people now. Dalan thinks it was the fertilizer that did this. He is sad because the plants he took such good care of are now trying to devour him. Alpha suggests that he use the trap installation skill, and the rabbit says that if those things are named as traps, they wouldn't attack them. The boy realizes that this skill would be very useful for them. Meanwhile, time continued to pass in that place, and more players kept arriving at the dungeon. The mountain remained isolated and feared, but Dalan continued to build his ladder on the mountain. The rabbit says that no one is more addicted to work than that boy, and he doubts if he is really human. But after much work, even he needed to rest, needed to lie down and eat something. The rabbit thinks about it and suggests they eat something sweet. Twilight reached the forest at the beginning. The rabbit said he heard a participant say that there's honey inside a carnivorous plant while he was being devoured, and they went there to investigate. Dalan clears a path through the bushes, and soon he spots something that catches his attention. There were large carnivorous plants there, and from what seemed to be their mouths, a viscous yellow liquid was dripping. He asks if that's what it is, and the rabbit confirms, saying they'll eat them if they get any closer. Dalan thinks for a moment about what he can do now. One of the golems starts lifting a block of earth. Through a portal, the golems come out and collect the plants. The liquid is corn syrup, not honey, but it's still sweet. The rabbit thought it would be difficult, but there's nothing Dalan can't do. He looks back and gets startled because he saw more players. The rabbit immediately hides, disappearing from sight. Dalan already knew that the rabbit would hide if he saw players, but he didn't expect him to do it so quickly. Some of the players are harassing a small person. They are threatening a boy, demanding that he hand over his belongings. Dalan notices that adults are threatening someone who still looks like a child. The rabbit says telepathically that this is human nature, and Dalan gets startled and almost screams, but the rabbit says it's his ability. Dalan wants to know if he can do that too, but the rabbit says he probably can't because he's human. However, he ends up managing to do it. Alpha explains that since they're from the same sanctuary, they can communicate like that as long as they concentrate. He asks the rabbit what they can do without risking being caught by the mandrill. The little boy clings tightly to the bag he's carrying. As Dalan watches him, he remembers some things he went through. These are definitely not good memories he has. Dalan thinks it's almost time for them to be there. The adults keep harassing the boy more and more. An animal approaches them, making noise. It's the Dakmo, bipedal frogs armed and as friendly as a loan shark collecting a debt. One of the adults realizes they're bigger than the frogs and arms himself with his sword. He prepares to strike one of the little frogs, but his arm is quickly sliced off, and his arm falls to the ground, still holding the sword. He starts screaming in desperation. They may not look like it, but the little frogs are quite vicious, steeped in malice. They say they grew up in a rough place. The kid who was being bullied is terrified by this situation. The players are now horrified because they didn't imagine the little frogs would be so brutal. One of them, clearly with a deficit in intelligence, charges towards the frogs. The frog opens its mouth with glee, and it strikes with a mocking move because it only disarmed the fool. Now the oppressor is being oppressed, and the guy's underwear is already getting heavy. The bell rings because the little frogs are slicing everyone up at snack time. The little frogs are the weakest monsters in the dungeon, but what they lack in strength, they make up for in malice. If you slip up, it's the end. But it's in the face of danger that humans awaken their hidden potentials, just like what happened with Dalan's little friend who turned into a beast after a stressful event. Dalan imagines that the kid might become as tough as his friend's son one day. The kid was running in panic and ended up crashing into Dalan. They fall to the ground, completely knocked down. He asks what that was and thinks he almost cried from the pain, but Alpha insists that he did cry from the pain. That was the kid, who is now terrified and begging for help. He tells the boy to get up, but before he can finish the thought, they hear the sound of a little frog. Two of them were already coming at them with the speed of tourists in a dangerous neighborhood with iPhones in hand. But Dalan already knew the procedure and called upon the strength of the wild boar to wreak some havoc. The first little frog was quickly taken out, and the second got a free orthodontic treatment. The kid looks at Dalan completely impressed. That guy is way too strong and doesn't have any side effects from substances because he's very hairy. One of the little frogs makes a face as if it knows things have gone wrong for them. They advance cowardly, ready to slaughter the humans. Dalan narrowly dodges the amphibian's big mouth, but coming at him in a cowardly way is just wrong, and now he's furious. And he quickly delivered a knee to the frog's belly to make sure it understands the situation. The second little frog charges in, thinking it's the main character of the story. Dalan held its head with great love and care, and prepared to throw it, and he hit the first frog with the body of the second to show that the situation here is serious, and if it weren't, it would be for the frogs. A third little frog advances with a broken sword in hand. The blow barely missed Dalan. He narrowly avoided being hit by the beast. Taking advantage of the proximity, he quickly delivered a friendly elbow strike, the kind that only breaks ribs. Behind him, a little frog was armed with some sharp weapons. It charges for the attack, thinking that this story is all about its froggy way of life. The kid screams in desperation, warning Dalan of the danger. He turns quickly, facing the threat, and with the privileges that only the plot can provide, he managed to pull an item from his inventory. A large block of earth fell on the little frog. The remaining frogs, still alive, are now reflecting on whether it's really worth continuing to take that free beating. And after a simple deliberation, they decided to get out of there. Dalan realizes the fight is over, but he's feeling chills running down his body. He thinks it might be the impressed look from the kid. The snotty kid was looking at him as if he was seeing a god incarnate. Dalan still doesn't know how to react. He stands still as the boy approaches him. He warned the boy not to follow him because he's going to a dangerous place, and he said that he couldn't use the ability again and was almost passing out from a lack of glucose. The boy asks if he mentioned something about sweet food, and reaching into his bag, he asked if this would help and extended his hand to him. Dalan observes it for a brief moment. He can't believe what he's seeing. In that hostile environment, food is one of the few things that make life interesting, but he hadn't been able to fully enjoy the taste of things for a while. That's why he took a risk to get something sweet from carnivorous plants. He was already missing eating something sweet because sweetness is happiness, and the snotty kid's offer is too good to refuse. The boy has a bottle of Dolly with him, and it wasn't just any bottle. It was 1.5 liters of the purest sugar syrup, and he innocently says that he has 2 more bottles. Dalan says that 1 bottle per day will last for 3 days. The kid didn't understand anything, and he says that's the cost of special training. Twilight falls over the dungeon. He's on top of one of its towers, looking at the map, and the kid asks who that really tough guy is. He said that he's human too, and that they should go underground now. He drinks his Dolly Garana, thinking that the kid must be exhausted and that going underground is the safest thing to do. Once there, the snotty kid can't stop being amazed by what he sees. He asks the boy to choose a pillow, but can only think that all of this was done by Dalan. Night finally falls upon them. The boy said that he was summoned while he was leaving the market because he was shopping for his mother. He's an enthusiastic kid, 14 years old, and his name is Dong. Dallin thinks he acts too nice on purpose out of fear of being judged or hated, and he's the first adult to help him in that place and tells the boy that he should see him as a savior. But the boy thinks he's talking to himself and is already thinking about being cautious around him. The kid asks if some kind of ability was used to build that tower. Dallin said yes, and the boy wants to know what it is. He gave a small demonstration and said it's an earth control ability. And now he wants to know what ability the boy received when he was summoned, and he said it's the God of Food's ability. He gains strength when he's full, and his physical abilities are doubled when he's hungry. Dallin didn't know something like that existed and realizes it's similar to the boar's strength that he has and asks if he gets weak when he's hungry. The boy doesn't know because he gets hungry easily and hasn't been full since he arrived there. Dallin thinks that's tragic and decides to take care of him from now on. He puts plenty of food on the table and asks the boy to satisfy his hunger. The moon lights up the night sky of the dungeon. The rabbit is in the forest because his boss sent him to get salt stones. He complains that Dallin is too arrogant. He's moving stealthily so as not to be noticed and hopes not to encounter the mandrill around here. He doesn't even know what a salt stone looks like and is very upset with his boss because of that. Telepathically, the boss asks if the rabbit is doing his job, and he ended up getting a big scare. The rabbit says he doesn't know what it looks like, and neither does Dallin, but he suspects it looks like a regular stone. However, he asks the rabbit to come back because it's already late, and he wants to know if the boy is still there and that he's very hungry. Dallin tells the rabbit that he finished making the barbecue sauce. The rabbit was so happy about that he shouted in the middle of the night that his boss was the best there is. He returned to the cave, and his boss thanked him for his hard work. He laughed at the rabbit's camouflage, which looked funny, and the rabbit said it was his fault for making him go out at night. He removed the camouflage, and Dallin asked him to keep quiet because the boy was already asleep, and the rabbit asked for soda, but there was only a little left. The rabbit complained about the taste of the drink, saying it tasted like meat, and Dallin said he knew he would react that way. He told the rabbit that he should eat the leaves he was wearing, but the rabbit said it was awful to have to eat leaves. Dallin told him he shouldn't say things like that. And with the rabbit squirming on the floor, he noticed something. He reached out his hand toward him, and the rabbit began to apologize, worried. He begged to be spared because he thought he was about to be punished. But Dallin simply removed the leaf that was still on his face. He tasted the leaf, and the rabbit asked if he hadn't also said that he didn't like leafy greens. The boy took out a piece of meat, much to the rabbit's surprise. The rabbit wanted to know if he was going to eat the meat with that leaf, and Dallin said he would show him the taste of paradise. And showing him, he said that he had finished wrapping the meat, and he made sure to put it in the rabbit's mouth. The rabbit fell in love with that combination of interesting texture and wonderful flavor. Dallin explained that the leaf on his clothing was edible, and that it's even better with meat. That leaf is perilla leaf, and he had the rabbit collect more of them. And after using the leaves, he also used the remaining seeds, and in a large pot, he fried them over the fire. And after pressing them, he managed to extract oil from them. He finally produced perilla oil. Now he only needed salt to complete the sauce. The rabbit didn't know what that was, but Dallin said he would know as soon as he brought back a salt stone. The day dawns in the dungeon. The boy has a piece of meat in his mouth and a stick in his hands. Dallin asks him to stay focused because the little frog is coming. The little frog is heading towards the boy. He told the boy not to be scared and to remember that when he's full, he gets stronger. But it seems the lesson didn't go too well. The boy apologizes, but Dallin says that no one is that good right from the start. Even so, the boy was very surprised that the young man had managed to capture one of those little frogs. And he said that where they're going is dangerous, so he should train the boy here because his ability is very good for fighting. He said he would give him food to store in his inventory, but the boy didn't know what that was. It's his personal storage, and he asked if the guy didn't tell him anything about it, and the boy said no. It seems the mandrill didn't tell him out of pure sadism, which explains why the boy has been carrying items in his hands. The rabbit said that it must be the boss's fault because without the first level boss, many players are moving on to the next level. The boy is worried because to him, Dallin seems to be talking to himself again. Then he says they should continue the training. Time passed, and the rabbit is now a leaf collector. Dallin gives instructions to the boy as if he were his coach, and this time, he manages to hit the little frog. The boy's ability is leveled up to 2 now. He signals his thanks to Dallin, who is watching him with gratitude for the progress made. The last day of training arrived, and the sun heated up the dungeon. The 2 of them are now in what is called the burning desert. 2 humans were there now, and with them, a rabbit. After hearing that he had seen a salt desert, he made him lead them to it. The heat was so intense that it irritated Dallin, who said that if they didn't find anything, he would be upset with the boy. And the boy said it was someone from his group who said that near the desert, there was a place with white sand that appears when the tide goes out. Dallin hopes to find it because they have a bottle full of oil. And he says that he has now made up his mind. That night, they will have braised pork belly for dinner. 15 long minutes of walking through the desert passed. Dallin is exhausted and starts to imagine that they won't find anything there. Even the boy is losing hope and says it's hard to walk in the sand because his feet keep sinking. He says that the salt desert might not exist, but that's not what Dallin was talking about. Their method might be wrong. And in front of the boy, he installs a portal. He told the boy not to be surprised and asked him to stay behind him. and from the portal, the golems begin to emerge. The boy is amazed because they look like tanks, and Dawn says they are made of earth. That's just the beginning, and the boy will learn to handle himself well. And he says, grateful, that he will do his best. Dawn is pleased because the boy is smart and regrets not being able to go with him. The rabbit telepathically asks if his master hasn't forgotten anything. He's very hot, and Dawn says he couldn't build a tower because it would attract too much attention, but he could come inside the golem if it's too bad out there. He continues outside, exhausted from the heat and fatigue. He doesn't even know what salt is and doesn't understand why they work so hard to find it. Soon, something appears on the horizon. The rabbit wipes his eyes to see better. He focuses a bit more on what's ahead. There were many giant scorpions, and many camels too in a herd. He wonders where those creatures are headed. He calls his boss to come outside and see it too. Dalan and the boy are surprised by what they see. It seems the salt desert really does exist. An achievement was unlocked for discovering the salt desert. The reward is to enhance the taste of the salt. Dalan doesn't even understand the reason for that achievement, and the boy is very impressed because he had never seen anything like it. He boasts to the rabbit, who says he's not like the mandrill. The little boy takes a bit of salt on the tip of his finger, and tasting it, he confirms that it's really salt. The whole ground is made of salt. He suggests they compete to see who can collect more salt. He asks the boy what he said, and the boy realizes that Dalan had already collected quite a lot of salt. The boss says that amount should be enough. They have the perfect combination to make that day's dinner, and the rabbit doesn't understand why they went through all that trouble just for that. Dalan gives the boy some blocks of salt and says they should last in a lifetime, to which the boy thanks him and says he will remember him. And the young man returns the thanks because they only found it thanks to the boy. As his hand touched the boy's head, a yellow light appeared. Alpha says that the requirements of helping the master and having a sincere opinion from him have been met. Now the boy can become a dragon apostle. The rabbit suddenly appears, and the boy is startled because he can now see him. He tells the boy to be quiet because it's not the time to be promoted. Dalan pushes the rabbit aside and asks Alpha if the achievement was to be impressed, and he confirms that it was like a kind of test. Now he realizes that as an apostle, the mark of the death dragon can be erased. But Alpha says that the boy won't have as many privileges. Dalan wants to know what the good part of that is then. He said that it was good for them, especially for Dalan. The boy will be able to gather vital energy while he works. He can perform sacrifices since Dalan is too lazy to do them. Dalan says he goes out and always brings back a lot, and Alpha says it's not just that, and that the temple's goal is to bring the dragon back. He now wants to know what the benefit is for the boy, and Alpha says the benefit is serving Artia. The rabbit interrupts and says that the apostle doesn't need to eat to bring vital energy, and Alpha confirms the information, and he told him to think about the boy's ability. Dalan remembered the god of food ability. The strength doubles if he gets full. It remains to be seen what would happen if he got completely full as an apostle. The duration of the ability will increase. The boy has no idea what they're talking about. Dalan sums it up by saying that the boy will be able to keep eating even when he's full, and he loved that. He asks if the way to designate him is the same as the one used on the rabbit. Extending his hand, he designates him as an apostle, and the boy is enveloped in energy. He felt much stronger and asked if this was the power of the dragon. He felt incredibly powerful now that he was a dragon apostle. Dalan doesn't notice any difference and thinks the boy is emphasizing the dragon part too much. The snotty boy shouts out loud that he's now a dragon apostle. Dalan thinks he's thirsty for attention. The rabbit doesn't know what that's about, and the young man says it's something you gain with age. The kid is very happy, but he quickly looks scared in a certain direction. They were surrounded by giant scorpions. He asks his boss what they will do now that they are surrounded. Dalan says they'll think of something. He's not even worried. He mentions that this is the boy's graduation test. The boy can't believe he has to do this, and Dalan says he just needs to avoid the venom and thinks that even if the boy gets hurt, he'll heal him. The young man calls for the elephant golem and promptly climbs on it because it's fun to watch a fight from up high. The rabbit says they're weak monsters, and Dalan encourages the boy, reminding him that he's now a dragon apostle. He throws a betel to the boy. He tells him that even though he's scared, he should remember what he trained for, and the boy remembers why he needs to become stronger. The boy was almost ready to give up on his training. He doesn't even know why Dalan trains so hard, and the young man says it's tough to be young and have to work so hard already. However, the boy should continue because he's capable of doing it, and the reason for this is just one thing. The boy needs to fight to survive, and to make it back to his world. Dalan praises the snotty boy's determination. The kid runs towards the scorpions. The first one tries to strike him with its stinger, but the boy managed to dodge the attack. He continues advancing, much to Dalan's surprise. He jumps, ready to hit the monster, and he brings the baton down with a precise blow to what would be its head. The boy realizes that his attack was super effective. Dalan reminds the boy to always check his fullness level and that another scorpion is approaching from behind. He eats a bit more and lands another blow on the scorpion. The rabbit notices that the boy isn't having any trouble but wonders what Dalan is up to now. The young man is holding a large pot in his hands. He looks at the boy, who's fighting well, and finds it hard to just stand there watching. The rabbit is wondering what he's going to do. Dalan says he's going to eat those scorpions. The rabbit now thinks this human must have come from China. One of the scorpions tries to grab the boy with its pincer, but he uses the baton to defend himself. He puts in some effort to avoid being overpowered, and lifting the baton, he manages to free himself from the scorpion's grip. With another strike, he manages to tear off one of the pincers. It falls to the ground, lifeless. Dalan calls for his successor, who responds timidly, and he orders him to collect the scorpions. Given the possibility of venom, he purifies them with his ability. One of the pincers is now in the basin. Everything is properly prepared. Meanwhile, the boy is surrounded by scorpions that join the wrong team. Soon, he smells something in the air. He quickly asks what it is because the smell is really good, and the rabbit is fanning the fire as best he can. He asks the boss if putting salt in the oil is a good idea, and he says he can taste it if he wants to. The boy is upset, imagining that they're eating something delicious without him. He's distracted, and one of the scorpions sneaks up on him. The boy asks to eat too, and while he does so, he strikes the scorpion that was behind him. The appearance was very appealing. The pincer looked like that of a giant lobster. Dalan says that if the boy doesn't hurry, they'll eat everything without him. The boy is now determined. He heads towards the remaining scorpions with a clear goal. There was nothing the scorpions could do against the boy. Soon, they were all eating peacefully. That same night, they were in the forest at the beginning. Dalan gifts the boy with a hide and says he might encounter other players there. He's very grateful for the days that only cost a few sodas. He told the boy not to cry because he'd soon realize that soda has a different value there. The boy smiles at that remark. He says goodbye and continues on his way alone. But Dalan hopes they'll meet again in the future. Not just the boy, but all his friends. Dalan is at the dragon's temple and asks if the little squirrel was okay in his absence. He's sad about parting ways with the boy, but happy to have made it back home. Now he sees that the little squirrel probably didn't stop eating because it's quite chubby. Alpha asks if he could take care of the temple like it's his home, but the young man thinks he's being annoying. But after thinking a bit more, he decides he'll work more on the temple. Alpha has been observing him and thinks that human is impressive, and only time will tell if he found that temple by luck. Investigating the temple, Dalan was thoughtful about some things. He wants to know if resetting a trap will bring the oil back to it, and Alpha says yes. And he asked the rabbit to bring it, much to Alpha's surprise. Appreciating the rabbit's work, he said he'd let him eat some meat. Alpha wants to know what he's going to do, and Dalan tells him to watch. He cleaned the pot and filled it with the oil he had made. Now he used his trap installation ability. Then he removed the oil and used the trap reset ability. The idea worked. He had made more oil now. Alpha asks what kind of trap that was, and Dalan says it's an infinite oil source, much to the system's annoyance. Alpha's patience had reached its limit. The day dawns in the first phase region. Mandrill notices that the boss has disappeared and the boars are becoming increasingly scarce. Quality is better than quantity for vital energy, and the first phase isn't filtering them well. Only the little frogs are in sufficient numbers, so he needs to do something about it. A stone falls to the ground, bouncing. It's the rabbit who kicked him, annoyed at having to collect more leaves. Dalan told him to do that while he built the staircase. He could refuse, but then he wouldn't be eating meat anytime soon, which made the rabbit extremely frustrated. Nearby, some movement catches his attention. There was a small group of little frogs walking by. He hid, thinking it was the baboon, but it was just frogs. And he saw they were armed with enchanted weapons. Those items shouldn't be in the first phase. Mandrill appears behind the rabbit without recognizing him, almost scaring him to death. The rabbit is now sweating cold, completely terrified. Mandrill looks at the bush below him. He saw familiar white fur and ears. Now the rabbit was even more terrified. Mandrill reaches out his hand to grab the rabbit, and pulling him by the ears, he realizes it's just an ordinary rabbit. He observes it for a moment. The rabbit is munching on some leaves, and he confirms that this isn't the rabbit he was looking for because he's using an ability that deceived him. Mandrill tosses it aside, uninterested. The rabbit stays on the ground for a few moments. He starts trying to get up. In front of him are some little frogs looking for a snack. One of them prepares to strike him, but the rabbit, enraged, shakes off the frogs, saying that Mandrill will pay for this one day. On the opposite side of the mountains, Dalan works with great dedication. Being on the mountainside makes him adrenaline-fueled, and he asks the ostrich to watch over him. He brought the golem as a precaution because he was always crossing the cliff. His stone-breaking ability was already at level 7. Sacrifices are hard work, but repetitive tasks are his specialty, like breaking the cliff. And suddenly, a message appears saying he had entered stage 4. Even he wasn't expecting that. In his mind, it didn't make sense for the stages to be so close, and Alpha says he doesn't know what was done with the land. Dalan asked what Alpha had said. The color of the mist in that place was different, and it also had a different smell. Dalan begins to lose consciousness. After a while, he wakes up with the ostrich in front of him. Alpha asks if the temple master has woken up. He asks what happened, and Alpha thanks him for bringing the ostrich. The mist is poisonous, and the ostrich brought him back before something worse happened. That was a close call. Dalan needs something to help him with this, and it seems he had an idea. Alpha says he should return to the temple, but the young man says he'll continue descending. With a handkerchief in hand, he says he'll deal with this fine dust, but Alpha insists again that it's poison. Alpha can't believe he wants to go through the poison using just a piece of cloth. He says no, what if he uses the purification ability on the handkerchief? It might work. At first, that ability wasn't very good. He used it to purify mushrooms, but after a while, the ability didn't develop any further. No matter how hard he tried, it didn't progress until the poison cloud appeared. The gas mask is just a small protection. His plan was to use the ability on the entire poison cloud, and he began to use his ability little by little. And he noticed that the clouds didn't regenerate, which would make his job of clearing the path easier. He purified the cloud and made the staircase repeatedly. This would be very tedious for some people, but Dalun isn't a normal person, and after much effort, he managed to pass through the thick mist, contemplating a beautiful scene. In a single day, he reached level 10. Perhaps by increasing the ability, he might be able to purify even bigger things. Birds fly across the dungeon sky, but one of them has a silhouette that's far too different. Dalun tries to see better because it was too big, and the griffin was already too close to him on the mountainside. It attacks him with its claws. The attack kicked up a lot of dust in the area. Dalun had protected himself with a block of earth. Letting it go, he made his way back with his ostrich. He ordered the golem to climb as fast as it could. The griffin watched them fleeing up the stairs. It took flight in their direction. The beast sensed something was wrong. It halted its advance upon reaching the poisonous cloud, as if it were a barrier separating the phases. Dalun saw that it couldn't pass through the cloud, acting as a boundary between stages. Soon, the griffin gave up and returned to where it came from. Stage 4 might be full of such creatures, and now he doesn't know what to do. The griffin is flying high above. It clings to the mountainside with its powerful claws. It sees that above it are the stairs and the poisonous cloud. It climbs the slope carefully, and finally reaches the stairs. It begins to follow the path now that it's clear. Unaware of what was approaching, Dalun continues to excavate the mountain. His carving ability is now at level 8. He was pleased with this because if he continues like this, he'll be able to descend much faster. The rabbit is returning to the temple, tired and thinking about talking to his boss. Finding leaves is becoming increasingly difficult, and his boss never seems to get tired. He even wonders what that human is doing now. High in the sky, a griffin is flying. The rabbit can hardly believe what he's seeing. Dalun is exhausted and thinks about stopping to rest for a while. Telepathically, the rabbit says they're in big trouble. He's panicking, saying that things have gone crazy. Dalun wants to know what it is, and the rabbit says there's an eagle there, and Alpha corrects him, saying it's a griffin. Alpha says it must be stopped because if the temple is destroyed, the contract will have problems. Dalun has no idea what contract he's talking about, and Alpha says he could lose the temple's abilities to Dalun's despair. The griffin soars into the sky with its wings, and dives down, destroying part of the ruins. The debris begins to fall to the ground. The rabbit is thrown aside. He wonders if he should flee now. He only receives useless orders and wishes he could find his safe shelter. But he pauses to think about it. He shouldn't think about it because that place is now his home. The rabbit becomes resolute and determined. Dalun arrives and puts his hand on the rabbit, saying that's the spirit, but he made one mistake. That temple in front of them. It was their home, and it would be protected. He calls his golems to assist him. They appear, ready to obey. The griffin hovers above them in the air. Dalun looks at the griffin and asks if it had already forgotten about him. The griffin screeches angrily. As it approaches, Dalun summons some cubes and orders the golems to hurl them at the griffin. The first block hits it squarely. The dust obscures the view of what happened, and the griffin emerges unscathed from the attack. Dalun is impressed by its physical resilience. The rabbit says it must have caused some damage, but they need to attack with something sharp. Dalun opens his inventory to see what he has. He grabs his spear and uses the strength of the boar, and hurls it forcefully at the griffin. It strikes, seemingly embedding itself in the creature. Dalun realizes he hit it. The griffin writhes in pain and strikes the spear with one of its paws, and it falls among its feathers. The young man concludes that his throw wasn't strong enough, and now the griffin seems even more enraged. It resumes its assault on the temple, much to everyone's dismay. Alpha says something strange is going on because the griffin is focused on the temple, not Dalun. Alpha suspects it's searching for the altar, which makes sense given the direction of the attacks. Dalun remembers the dragon's chamber, and the rabbit says the griffin is headed for the altar. The rabbit explains that it must have identified that the altar is the temple's energy center, which is why it's targeting it. Dalun thinks that if they go there, they might be able to stop it. He tells the rabbit to take care of the golems and runs off. The rabbit is frustrated because the golems don't listen to him. Dalun is searching for the griffin. The rabbit thought Dalun would do something clever, but he just ran off. The young man is on the ostrich, looking for something, and he finds what he was looking for. Inside the temple, the griffin is breaking walls with its strength. It has finally reached the place where the altar is located. He's positioned behind the carnivorous plants. The griffin is drooling with anticipation, but its beak is struck by a rock. It was Dalun trying to get its attention. He said that this place is cruel for invaders, the potato field. The vines surge forward, attempting to capture the griffin, which is now startled. The griffin is completely entangled by them. It struggles with all its might not to be dragged away, and the vines begin to snap under its strength. Dalun didn't expect this creature to be so strong. He opens his inventory while running. He searches for items that could help him. He places an item on the ground and Alpha asks what he's doing. The young man says that if attacking from afar doesn't work, maybe up close it might. With his hand on the ground, he reset the trap in the room, and from the ground, structures begin to emerge. The trap had reset, and he orders the arrows to be fired. They are launched directly at the griffin. The griffin can't dodge because it's held by the vines. The arrows hit the griffin squarely. Alpha was pleased with this, as the traps had been used very effectively. The attack ceased after a while, and Dawn asked why. Alpha explains that the arrows ran out and the trap needs to be reset again, but Dawn doesn't have enough vital energy for that. The griffin is motionless and he's unsure if it's alive or if it's been defeated. Its eyes were closed, but as soon as he approaches, the eyes snap open. The griffin moves, destroying the arrow trap. Dawn can't believe this creature is so strong. Now he thinks it might be the end for him, and Alpha doesn't understand why he said that. The griffin attacks with one of its claws, and the young man narrowly dodges. Alpha starts lamenting to RT for not being able to fulfill its duty. Dawn says he could reset it later. The beast continues its assault, and Dawn barely manages to keep dodging. Now in the air, he feels he won't be able to avoid the next strike. But one of his golems catches him with its hand. The rabbit said that the golems didn't want to listen to him, but he arrived just in time to save the day. Dawn is safe in the hands of the gorilla golem. The rabbit gives orders to the golems to finish the griffin off. The rabbit asks his boss if he's okay, and Dawn says that his successor arrived just in time. The golems are holding the griffin, which is struggling as much as it can. He instructs 2 gorillas to hold its wings and the others to secure its legs and tells the rabbit to move away from there. The griffin is now completely immobilized. All that is left are close combat attacks, and the only ability that could do something to it is the strength of the boar. Dawn needs to try and see if this works on monsters from the 4th phase. He activates his ability, preparing to strike, and hurls himself toward the immobilized griffin. He focuses all of his strength into a single attack, and brings down the metal bar on the creature's head. The bar bent as soon as it made contact. It was bizarre, and he could hardly believe what had happened. The griffin shakes its head, causing Dawn to fall. The rabbit is terrified that his boss might get hurt, because the griffin intends to snap him up in midair, and closing its beak, it manages to catch him. The rabbit watches the scene, saddened and in disbelief. The metal bar falls to the ground, bent. The rabbit says that none of this makes sense. The griffin stands with its beak closed, victorious, but soon it begins to sweat profusely and look unwell. The desperation is so intense that it manages to break free from the golems. It flees, smashing through walls. The rabbit is happy it's gone, but still worried. Dawn appears behind him, saying that he thought he was going to die, and the rabbit says he understands. He takes a brief pause to process what he just heard and from whom. He's crying because he thought his boss was done for. He tries to hug Dylan, who pushes him away because he's dirtying his clothes. Outside the ruin, there's a lot of debris. Inside, there's also plenty of destruction. The young man says the place has turned into a dump. The rabbit wants to know how he managed to survive that. He explained that as soon as the griffin tried to eat him, he threw some salt stones into its mouth and the salt caused it to react that way. The rabbit says he's very lucky and wants to know how the griffin managed to get there. And Dylan spoke of the route that leads to the 4th phase via the cliff and that he encountered the griffin there. The rabbit never imagined that the 4th phase was so close since he had never been there. The rabbit wants to know if the griffin is dead, but Dawn says that the salt wouldn't be enough to kill it. Alpha warns that the griffin will return, and the rabbit adds that the poison clouds will reset, but the griffin might come back before that happens, and then it will be over. Dawn asks the rabbit if he knows when the reset will happen, but he doesn't know. Thinking that the griffin might return, the young man decides to build a line of defense. Using his reset ability, he begins to reconstruct the temple. However, he doesn't have enough vital energy to finish everything. He needs to go out hunting and doesn't know how many sacrifices it will take to rebuild the place. The rabbit asks Alpha what can provide vital energy, and Alpha says that plants and animals can work. Dawn asks the rabbit what he plans to do. The rabbit presents a few items, and Alpha identifies them as enchanted weapons, explaining that they can also be used as sacrifices since they contain vital energy. Dawn wants to know where the rabbit got them, and he explains that he took them from the frogs. They're from the 2nd phase, but Mandrill brought them to the 1st phase. As soon as Dylan holds one of the enchanted weapons, he earns another achievement and, as a reward, gains information. One of the knives has a cutting force ability. He examines the instrument closely. He asks Alpha if he could use this ability, and Alpha explains that in his current state, he could only use it if he were a mage. Dawn asks if Mandrill is a mage, but the rabbit explains that Mandrill uses the dungeon system and only places vital energy on the altar. Dawn then asks if their altar is an altar, and the rabbit confirms that it is, reminding him that they're in the dragon's temple. The young man grins mischievously because he's just had an idea. The rabbit feels uneasy, sensing something bad about this idea. The path leads to the altar, so they will steal it. The rabbit and Alpha are speechless at the suggestion. The rabbit thinks his boss is mentally unwell. What Alpha says in theory makes sense. The altar must be a battery of vital force, and Dylan plans to take that energy for himself. Stealing the altar is dishonorable, but if it belongs to the death dragon, it's different, Alpha says. Please, Dalan asks the rabbit what he thinks of the plan. The rabbit imagines that if the altar disappears, Mandrill will be in big trouble. With a wicked look in his eyes, he admits that his boss has had the best idea ever. Dalan assigns the rabbit to carry out an important task. The rabbit is pouring a viscous liquid over the grass. The trail he's made is reasonably large and he's quite tired. He sighs because even he has to work now. If Mandrill enchants weapons, he must be visiting the altar frequently, and if they go without a plan, they'll be defeated. That's why Dalan asked him to do this. But the rabbit still doesn't know exactly what his task is. As he strikes two stones together, he says he knows nothing. He just did what he was told to do. Soon the fire begins to spread through the forest. Mandrill is surprised by the growing fire. He has no idea how it happened. The rabbit telepathically says that it was fun, and Dalan thinks the rabbit might have some issues. He sits patiently, waiting. In front of him is a hole, and out of it emerges the little squirrel, very cheerful. That was the signal. Mandrill had left the temple. Now it was Dalan's turn to enter the ruins. Inside, he encounters something different. The altar was in plain sight, to his surprise. But something seemed different about it. Alpha explains that the altar's vital force has changed, making it usable by non-mages. Although he's reluctant to admit it, the Death Dragon used the separator. Even Dalan with enough authority could use the altar. He notices that Alpha seems a bit unsettled by this. The young man starts digging around the hole to seal the altar. He hears a sound and wonders if Mandrill has already returned. The rabbit tells him not to worry about that. It's just Mandrill shouting angrily about the rabbit's work, who has never been happier in his life for causing an arson. In the temple, this should be enough, and Dalan wonders if he should call the golems to help. Setting up a portal, the golems appear, and they carry the altar through the newly opened portal. Alpha suggests they should use magic to erase their tracks and throw Mandrill off their trail. It's just about creating new tracks to cover the old ones. Dalan comments that Alpha seems a bit aggressive. Now they have to destroy the temple. The young man starts using his hammer to cause destruction. Mandrill, far away, senses something is happening. He doesn't know why the temple would be collapsing. Mandrill rushes back, worried about the integrity of the altar. He runs desperately towards the temple. When he arrives, he's faced with the scene he didn't want to see. The temple was completely destroyed. Players are wondering what that noise was in the middle of the night. The snotty boy knows it was the voice of his master, who must have done something grand. The rabbit suddenly appears beside him, startling him. Snotty boy whispers that the other people can't see him, but the rabbit tells him to stay calm and listen. They've finished everything and there should be good weapons on the ground. He advises using them and avoiding wolf meat because it causes stomach problems. After giving these tips, the rabbit takes off, leaving Snotty Boy without a chance to thank him. He whispers that he's grateful to the rabbit. The rabbit hears him, glances back briefly, then continues on his way. The rabbit, once a criminal and temple destroyer, had reached a day in his life when he received a thank you. A thanks from a dungeon player. They're now at the dragon's temple. The stone carving ability is at level 10. And Dalan received the achievement of Temple Destroyer with an unknown reward. Dalan obtained a new job by stealing an entire altar. Now he has 2 altars, and even Alpha is impressed by this feat. He asks where to start, and Alpha suggests sacrificing the marble. Dalan asks if he can use the enchantment system, and Alpha says he'll only get a portion. It was very heavy, and Dalan asks if it's enough to revive Artia. Alpha says no, and the rabbit mentions that not all the vital force is there, just a small amount. But Alpha notes that it's enough to restore the temple, which is already a big deal. He positioned the sphere on top of the altar. He was ready to perform the sacrifice. A strong light illuminated the room. The sphere, once blue, turned golden yellow. The altar began to glow intensely, startling Dalan. The achievement popped up again, but there was no reward, and the rabbit was surprised to see that his status window was glitching. The rabbit grumbled after taking a few hits and walked away complaining. Strange letters began to appear on the screen. He earned the achievement of Temple Restorer, and as a reward, he now owns an altar. Both the rabbit and Alpha were shocked. The altar of death had now become an altar of life. Alpha told Dalan he should be happy about this. The rabbit said that with 2 altars, they could create a second temple. But Dalan doesn't see the advantage in that since they're always on the move. What he wants now is to use the enchantment system, and Alpha says is possible, so he decides to finish restoring the temple. He uses the reset ability several times but wishes he could do it all with a single command. Alpha tells him that he needs to improve the ability further. Dalan continues his work of resetting the temple. After much effort, the temple was fully rebuilt. The rabbit wants them to have another barbecue soon, but Dalan still has work to do because the griffin might return to attack them. The golems are carrying some things to set up traps. Alpha says that if Dalan were a mage, it would be faster. Dalan asks if the temple was designed for mages, and Alpha replies that everything was done with slaves like him. They're now on the cliff trying to figure out how to reinforce the place. The rabbit begins to explain how things work. Reinforcements can be made with a number of altars, and they could add whatever options they wanted. And the higher the level of enchantment, the more vital force is used. Dalan decides to enchant the arrow trap with penetration level 1 and paralysis level 1. He wants to test the effect of the enchantment. The arrows are fired toward a boar carcass. Apparently, they didn't hit the target. The rabbit says they did hit. Dallin goes to check what went wrong. The arrows were so strong that they weren't visible. That was incredibly powerful. This gave them a deep sense of relief, because in that place there's a monster yearning for revenge. A minor detail delayed its hunt with a bitter taste in its mouth. The griffin is climbing the cliff full of hatred, and it's furious with Dallin. It climbs with the determination of someone bent on causing chaos. It continues climbing until it reaches the top of the cliff. At the top, the rabbit was already waiting for it, and he fires the enchanted arrows at the griffin. The powerful barrage hits it squarely. The force of the arrows was enough to make it lose altitude. They pierced its hide this time, but it's still alive. The rabbit is pleased because the enchanted trap was effective. The griffin continues to fall toward the ground. The griffin, using the last of its strength, clings to the cliff wall once again. It continues its ascent. This was the first time it had been wounded, and the poison from the arrows was slowly taking effect. Yet even all that wasn't enough to make it give up on its revenge. The beast had taken the situation personally and was already considering drastic measures to settle the score. The rabbit, observing the griffin's determination, realized that he once felt the same way and apologized for what he was about to do, but a sadistic and discreet smile formed on his face. He poured boiling oil over the beast. Now there was a large, circular staircase. Dallin heard a noise but couldn't tell what it might be. The rabbit said he got it and saw it fall. Dallin asked if it was finished. The rabbit wasn't sure but suggested that if it were still alive, the griffin would return flying, and they would take it down again. Dallin complimented the rabbit's work and noted that the enchantments were quite effective. But something happened that shifted his attention. A large hole appeared in front of him. Alpha asked if he needed to go into the hole, and Dallin said no. However, he found something inside. At the bottom of the cave, there was a source of light, and he felt he needed to check it out. Alpha urged him to ignore it, but Dallin didn't listen. With his golems, he investigated where the passage led. He saw that the glow was coming from a small sphere. It was on the ground with nothing around it. Dallin looked ahead and saw something unbelievable. It was the nest of the griffin that was trying to take him down. The griffin had woken up because its sleep was disturbed. Dallin was annoyed because the rabbit had said he had dealt with it. The griffin reacted quickly, charging toward them and breaking the wall. Dallin narrowly dodged and wondered if that creature was immortal. He noticed several arrows embedded in the griffin's belly. The rabbit was descending the stairs as fast as he could. He was ready to mock Dallin, thinking he would be rewarded. He found the hole and looked down. Dallin was down there in trouble. He dodged the griffin's attack again and ordered his golems to attack as well. The golems advanced toward the griffin to engage in combat. The griffin stood tall, but the golems managed to hold its legs. The rabbit couldn't believe what he was seeing and didn't understand why the griffin was still there. Dallin gave him a few slaps, annoying that the rabbit hadn't done the job he was assigned. The rabbit said he saw the griffin fall and didn't think it had a nest in the mountain. One of the golems was split into 2 pieces, and the other was sliced from top to bottom. A third golem advanced to strike the beast, but the griffin, now furious, destroyed it with a single blow. The golems were destroyed and the griffin was enraged. Dallin had only one option left. The rabbit said that this was a creature from the 4th phase and that they couldn't do anything there. Dallin looked at the rabbit seriously. The rabbit began cheering for the golems like a cheerleader. Dallin asked Alpha if he could bring the traps through the portals, and Alpha said yes, asking if he wanted to bring the arrow trap there. Dallin said there wasn't time but created a portal anyway. He entered the portal and the rabbit thought he was being abandoned. The rabbit tried to hurry the golems so they could escape as well. The griffin turned its attention to the rabbit, who was terrified. But Dallin had just returned through the portal. He told the rabbit not to be afraid, and the rabbit tried to play it off, thinking that if he were wearing underwear, it would be heavy now. Dallin said he heard everything. In the first fight with the griffin, he had already thought about what to do with enemies whose abilities were not effective against. The strength of the boar was only useful against weak enemies. He needed an offensive ability that would be effective against strong ones. No matter how much he thought about it, he didn't know how to solve it. That was until he gained a large amount of vital energy, the raw material for temple abilities. While holding the rabbit by the head, he said, "Duck." And after that, he said, "Fire." Various things started coming out of the portal he created in that place. He and the rabbit were lying on the ground, and above them, arrows were flying non-stop. They hit the griffin squarely. Its face and head were riddled with arrows. The rabbit didn't understand how they passed through the portal. Alpha says there is another portal in front of the traps, and that, thinking about efficiency, a lot of vital energy was spent. But even if it's inefficient, the attack was extremely effective and well planned. After seeing the wounds on the griffin, he was sure it would work. That was the moment of his victory. The griffin agonizes over the wounds it just suffered, and it collapses in front of them, defeated. He achieved the Griffin Hunter title, and now he will be as brave as an eagle. He finds that reward practically useless. He gained another achievement for using arrows, and now his eyes will have a target. He doesn't know what a unique achievement is and thinks the griffin was weak, but the rabbit says that the monsters in each phase are special. That is not an offensive skill, and he wants to know how it works. A red dot is appearing on the wall. Don says that after picking up the bow, he was seeing it now. The rabbit asks if he is still checking the skill, and the guy says he is now understanding it. The dot shows where the arrow will land because it was in a different place from where he aimed. The rabbit suggests that he shoots the arrow right away, and he prepares to do so, tightening the bowstring. And he shoots the arrow using his skill. It hit the ground and deflected to the wall. The rabbit said he was terrible at that. The red dot was still on the ground, and the arrow that was up high still fell exactly on that red dot. The skill predicted where the arrow would land even though he was terrible. If he trained, it could be very useful. He wants to see the rewards and asks if the rabbit did what he had asked. He plucked the bird but doesn't know why he asked for that. Their dinner that day would be roast chicken, and even Alpha is surprised by this. Since the griffin has a different anatomy, the edible parts are the wings and hind legs. The other parts are complicated, so they were saved for emergencies. Even though it's seasoned, it must be hard to cook all that without the aid of an oven. Alpha says that with the solar stone, the fire will get hotter, and Dawn asks if those are the yellow stones. Alpha says they store the sun's brightness and are a valuable treasure. The guy didn't even imagine that would be useful. And it seems that solar energy works because plants are growing there. He steps on one of the plants, and soon it starts screaming very loudly, scaring him. The rabbit told him to be careful because that's a screaming plant that yells when stepped on. But he said they are tasty. Dawn asks how he knows that, and the rabbit ate some while looking for sesame. He wants to know if they stop screaming if purified, and Dawn notices they look like radishes. The rabbit starts smelling something delicious. The smoked griffin leg was ready to eat, much to the delight of the hungry rabbit. The two eat happily. The rabbit swears to follow his master forever, and Alpha felt left out. Time passed, and a special day arrived. Some stones are thrown to the ground. Dawn was standing before something. The day he was seeking had finally arrived. After 2 long months, he had crossed the entire cliff. His stone carving skill is at its maximum now, and the rabbit says he completed that achievement after breaking an entire mountain. And he's already surprised that his boss continues mining. He wants to go down another mountain and needs a safe place. He told the rabbit not to slack off and to take the golems to check the surroundings. He placed the solar stone inside the place he had dug out. His new hideout was finally ready, and Alpha asks if he doesn't plan to decorate the temple in the same way. He thinks about decorating the entrance, and Alpha asks how he's going to hide that place when he leaves, and Dawn says he'll close the entrance with stones. The rabbit comes back terrified, saying they are in trouble, and he asks where the golems he took are. And that was exactly what he wanted to talk about. Listening to the rabbit, he couldn't believe what he had heard. They are running because the rabbit had found other players, but they attacked the golems as soon as they saw them. And it makes sense. Anyone who saw them would think they were monsters. But if they were able to reach phase 4, it means they are very strong. He asked the rabbit if the golems would be okay, and he said they would certainly be annihilated. The participants, of course, not the golems. In a nearby clearing, a fierce battle is taking place. A player summons his shield to protect himself, and the big gorilla smacks him hard. The gorilla used so much force that it broke its own hand. Another player doesn't know where the golem's core is, which should be in its chest. His golem's cores are scattered in random places. The players notice that another one is approaching. Dawn spotted the players and told the rabbit to hide for now. Dawn is happy that they are really there. He approaches them, offering his greetings. The players don't understand this at first, because to them, it looked like he was fleeing in terror. One of them says there was another person being attacked by the golems. Dawn didn't understand why he thought that, and he finally realizes that they got everything wrong. He imagines they'll be upset if he says the golems are his, and the rabbit says he'll be lucky if they don't think he's a guide. But he will try to approach them anyway. The players are terrified and tell them that there are already too many golems there, and Dawn can't do much other than run away. He raises his finger in the air. The golems that were there pay attention to the gesture. They start moving immediately. The golems begin to run, following Dawn and abandoning the players. One of them noticed what was happening, and seeing that, he couldn't believe it. He imagined that Dawn did that on purpose to save them. There is a camp with huts in the forest. A player reports to another that they found other ruins, and he wants details about that. He followed the mysterious player to the mountains, and it's on the stone mountain, but he preferred not to enter there. The old man reflects because the hunting squad didn't find food and still found new ruins. They are hard to take down even with his skills, and he said they should send the rookies there. The player said that was very dangerous, and the old man said that's why they will send the rookies, and he would take the opportunity to show the rookies who is in charge of that place. The player listens to those words with some apprehension. On the mountainside, something happens. Dawn told his golems to stay there, and he closed the access to his hideout. The rabbit asks if they will be safe, and Dawn says he doesn't want to be misunderstood. The rabbit asks if he is going there because he heard the squirrel and if he can really understand it. And he said yes and asked the little squirrel again if it had seen people there. Worry is the mother of all virtues, he said, and he built a tower there to use his mini-map, and the rabbit noticed that he builds much faster now. Looking closely at the map, he followed the direction pointed by the little squirrel, and they continued their journey there. A message says he left the dungeon and arrived in the Valley of Death, and that he had entered the rift. Dawn doesn't know what that means. He didn't understand the concept of a rift in that place. The rabbit teases him, saying he doesn't know what that is. After giving the rabbit a few slaps, he asked the know-it-all to explain it to him. The more you advance through the stages, the more dungeons there are. In stage 4, there are 4 dungeons. Since they are not together, there are neutral zones between each one, and these spaces are called rifts. In other words, the space between dungeons is a rift. It's where players set up camp so they can do the dungeons more than once. Dalan has difficulty understanding because he never left the first stage. The rabbit says that thanks to this, there is a place they're called a village. Maybe this is the place Squirrel mentioned, and by the explanation, it seems to be a safe zone. The rabbit was immediately surprised by something, and he jumped on Dalan to save him from something. The boss doesn't know what happened, and the rabbit says that humans are too stupid. The villages are safe zones. In the dungeon they are in, there is no such place. A strong stench rises. A bunny hand appeared in front of him. An undead begins to rise from the ground, and the name Valley of Death starts to make more sense. The little squirrel charges forward, starving, and Dalan warns that it will have a terrible stomachache if it eats that. He uses the boar's strength to defend himself, and hits the skull with force. He didn't expect that to be so easy, but there were already other reanimated bodies there. But Dalan is not intimidated because he found them weak. Yet something makes him change his mind, and he begins to observe things more closely. In front of him now are many skeletons. A group charges toward the young man. The skeletons are determined to make him one of them. Dalan defends himself against one of them with his staff and prepares to strike it, saying that those numbers are nothing. The rabbit is already going all out as well, and he sliced through a group with his rabbit strikes. Dalan hadn't imagined that the rabbit was capable of doing that, and the rabbit asks his boss to watch what he can do. He destroys the skulls happily, expecting to receive more praise, and Dalan praises him earnestly because he realizes that the more he praises, the less he needs to fight. The rabbit is already very tired, and falling to the ground, he says he's at his limit, and Dalan complains about his performance. He grabbed him by the ears and started running away from there. One of the skeletons prepares to throw a spear. It heads towards Dalan and almost hits his foot but lands on the ground. Another one also reached him and landed in front of his foot. The young man tripped over the spear and fell clumsily to the ground. He starts to get up from the ground. Not long after, the skeletons had already surrounded him. Meanwhile, something was happening in the Rift Village. The old man asks if the reconnaissance team had left, and notice that the rookies are in high spirits. A young man is using his lightning skill, and with it, he takes down several skeletons at once, saving Dalan. He asked if the young man was okay since he was on a reconnaissance mission, and said there's a nearby village they could go to. Dalan immediately recognized his friend. He starts crying emotional. Seung also recognized him right away. In the Rift Village, a player asks if that's for real. The boy was crying but said that he had returned, and the young man asks if the one who had returned was Seung. And as he arrives at the village, he informs the others that Dalan is now with them. Another player gets emotional at what he's seeing, and starts shouting Dalan's name. The boy said the adult was crying more than he was. He asks if that was really his friend and is happy that he is there. Other players observe the commotion and say that a friend had returned to them. He didn't expect to cry so much and asks why Dalan didn't cry, but he said he had already cried plenty with Seung. The old man approaches because he heard they have a new guest, and the other players point to where Dalan is. Seung greets the elderly man who arrived there, and said he found him on the reconnaissance mission. The rabbit starts thinking about the elder, and Dalan asks if he's important. He said no, but he heard some things about him. The elder approaches the newcomer to get to know him better. Dalan bows and introduces himself formally to him. The elder comes even closer, making him uncomfortable. There was a man in the dungeon, weak and cowardly, and they thought you would soon be done for. But he had an interesting skill called clarity. The first time it left him disappointed, but as he perfected it, the true potential of it was discovered. Inside a very dangerous dungeon, he could see the weaknesses of opponents and how they attacked. He could see the enemy's strength with his clarity. But he realized that before the last dungeon of level 4, he was nothing, and if he entered there, he would certainly die. Knowing this, he abandoned his team and fled. He left his past behind and built a house in the rift. The creator of the village, the elder of the village. He is chatting with the elder, and he looks intently at Dalan. He is trying to identify Dalan's weakness with his skill. Our video ends here. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel. See you next time.